Chapter 238. The person who received Yuan Tianqing was a deputy commander in Haicheng Base. She was also the only female among all the deputy commanders. If you want to find these people, you can go to the mission hall to complete a mission. As long as you pay them, I think there should be people who will be willing to go with you. Yan Fengyu sat on the sofa and looked at Yuan Tianqing. She gave him an idea. Yan Fengyu was a beautiful and elegant woman. She looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. However, she was actually 29 years old. She was the only woman in the base who had reached the peak of level 6 and was about to enter level 7. Yuan Tianqing originally came to find Wu Chongyue, but Wu Chongyue was not in the base, so he went to see Zhou Shizu. Zhou Shizu was a busy man. After politely greeting him once, after greeting him politely, he asked Yan Fengyu to receive him. Of course, they would not lend their own troops to Yuan Tianqing. However, if it was someone else with this skill, there should be a lot of people who would volunteer to go with them if they were paid enough. Yuan Tianqing smiled. Thank you for using this platform to recruit people for me. Yan Fengyu smiled elegantly and said half-jokingly, even if you are handsome, I won't do it for free just because you are handsome. We also need to charge you a commission. Yuan Tianqing said nonchalantly, I know that. I brought it, but I don't know if it's enough. As he spoke, he asked Du Yuanxing, who was behind him, to take out a small cloth bag containing jewelry from his briefcase. Then he opened the bag and gently poured it on the table. Ding! 3 corpse cores fell on the table. Yan Fengyu looked at it and saw that it was 3 level 5 corpse cores. The commission was a little too much. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Oh, it's not that much. We didn't help much anyway, right? This is our first time working together, so I'll give you a discount." As she spoke, she stood up and walked to Yuan Tianqing's side. Then she bent her slender waist slightly, and an elegant fragrance wafted into Yuan Tianqing's nose. She picked up one of them and straightened up. Then she turned her head and smiled at Yuan Tianqing, then turned around and walked back to her seat. "One is enough. According to the usual price, 1 level 5 corpse core and 5 level 4 corpse cores would be enough. I don't need you to give me so much. Today I'll give you a discount and give you a level 5 pill. Consider it as giving you face." "Give me face?" Yuan Tianqing looked at her with the same smile, but there was something unclear in his eyes. After Yan Fengyu sat down, she crossed her long and slender legs. She smiled at him and said, "What, you don't believe me?" Yuan Tianqing shook his head with a smile and said, "No, of course I believe that Miss Yan is not fooling me." Yan Fengyu looked straight at him and said, "Well, make a list of the skilled personnel you need. Then we'll publish it for you. Of course, you can write down the remuneration or we can discuss it face to face." Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, "All right, I'll have someone send the list to you tomorrow. Thank you for your help." Yan Fengyu said with a smile. She looked at him meaningfully and said, "You don't have to be so polite. If you really want to thank me, why don't you have a meal with me? How is it? I wonder if Mr. Yuan is willing to give me face? Here it comes." Yuan Tianqing's heart flashed with a trace of awkwardness, but he still put on a graceful smile and said, "Of course, I'll give it to you. It's my pleasure." Du Yuanxing, who was at the back, had no expression on his face, but he was howling in his heart. "Wow, Deputy Leader, your luck with women is really good. As expected, you can rely on your face to make a living. Why didn't I have the same luck? Sigh, I'm so envious." Then, the 2 deputy leaders went to the cafeteria to have a meal together. Then Yuan Tianqing felt a large number of murderous gazes directed at him. Everyone looked at him with envy, jealousy, and hatred, because many people did not know Yuan Tianqing's identity. Therefore, they shot him with their gazes without any scruples. Yuan Tianqing said to her with a smile, "Goddess, you're really popular. It seems that the number of people in the base who have fallen in love with you can line up outside the base." Yan Fengyu, who was eating elegantly across from him, turned her head when she heard that. His cold gaze swept across everyone in the surroundings. Immediately, those people silently withdrew their gazes. Yan Fengyu withdrew her cold gaze and said to Yuan Tianqing with a faint smile, "They just want to monopolize beautiful women when they see them. You men's possessiveness has always been incomprehensible. You want to force what you can't have. Moreover, these people only like my body and appearance." After saying that, she picked up the goblet of red wine beside her, raised her head and slowly took a sip. Yuan Tianqing looked at her with some surprise. He did not expect this woman to be so straightforward when she was not talking about business. Her words were quite straightforward. She was right. Those men were looking at her with lust in their eyes. However, they were infatuated or had no feelings at all. After being here for a few days, he had learned a lot about Sea City. Speaking of beautiful women, there were 2 women in High City who were the most famous. One was the goddess-like beauty in front of him, Yin Fangyu. This Yin Fangyu could sit in the position of deputy leader, which meant that she was not just a vase. She was very efficient, strong, and had a high level of ability. This woman's aura was very strong. Although she looked beautiful, she could only be admired from afar, not played with. Otherwise, her dick would be burned off. As for the other woman, although she was famous, she was actually notorious. Although she looked very good, she was just an ordinary person. Without special abilities, she did not know how to do things and did not want to do things. If she was given an ordinary job, she would get bored in less than 3 days and leave. Not only was she lazy, but she also liked to cause trouble everywhere and bully people. As the lover of the leader, she went around bullying others. Although everyone was not afraid of this woman who had no special abilities and did nothing, they were afraid of the leader behind her. Therefore, when they were bullied, they dared not speak up. What was this woman called? He did not seem to have heard of her name. It was said that she was already dead. She was also a weirdo. All day long she would go out and cause trouble. No wonder everyone applauded after her death. After eating a luxurious dinner with Yin Fangyu, Yuan Tianqing returned to his room. In the room, he asked Du Yuanqing what the name of the notorious woman was. Du Yuanqing replied with a strange expression, "Oh, that woman. I heard her name is Lu Tianyu." Something. When Yuan Tianqing heard this name, he did not have any reaction for a moment. After 3 seconds he was stunned. He turned his head to look at Du Yuanqing and said, "What? What did you say her name was?" Du Yuanqing coughed lightly and said in amusement, "That's right. Yes, it's exactly what you think. Her name is Lu." Yuan Tianqing looked at Du Yuanqing and said with a strange expression, "Unfortunately, we seem to have met a zombie called Lu Tianyu not long ago." Chapter 239. The 2 of them looked at each other silently. Then Yuan Tianqing said, "It can't be the same person, right?" Du Yuanqing looked at him awkwardly and said, I think I'm not too sure." Yuan Tianqing crossed his arms in front of his chest and said thoughtfully, "But I heard that Lu Tianyu was thrown into a group of zombies, and he probably ended up being eaten. He also became a zombie." Du Yuanqing said, "And then isn't the one we know also a zombie? And she's also from Sea City." Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, "It's just the same name. We can't be sure that it's her. Also, I heard that the woman in Sea City is a bad woman, although we couldn't tell anything from the one we saw." Du Yuanqing shrugged, his expression that he did not know what was going on. That night, Yuan Tianqing made a long list of workers he needed, as well as his requirements and remuneration. The next day, he had Du Yuanqing bring it to Yin Fangyu. That afternoon, a person suddenly came to find him in a hurry. Yuan Tianqing thought that it was someone who was here to take the test, but when he saw it, it was someone he knew, and it was the person he was looking for. "Lin Yu? Why are you alone? What's with your appearance? Where are the others?" Seeing that Lin Yu was covered in dirt and covered in injuries, he was shocked. His face was pale, but he looked very anxious. Yuan Tianqing also stared at him in surprise. Vice leader. Lin Yu bent over and placed his hand on the door frame. She heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Then, after shouting at Yuan Tianqing, she fell limply to the ground. Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing reacted in time to support him, then brought him into the house. When Lin Yu woke up, it was already night time. He sat up on the bed, turned his head, and saw Yuan Tianqing sitting on the sofa next to him, reading a book. "Vice leader." Hearing Lin Yu shout, Yuan Tianqing immediately looked up at him. "You're awake." Then he stood up and took a glass of water from the table in front of him and handed it to him. "Drink some water first. Let's talk slowly." Lin Yu took the water and drank it in one gulp. Yuan Tianqing took his empty cup and put it on the table. Only then did he pull a chair over and sit down, looking at him as he asked, "Tell me what's going on." Lin Yu looked at Yuan Tianxing and said with some excitement, I didn't expect you to come to see City Base, Deputy Commander. We heard about what happened in the base but we didn't believe it. But now that I've seen you I think it's true. Oh right, Captain and the others. Yuan Tianxing saw that he was speaking incoherently, so he raised his hand and waved at him. Calm down and listen to my questions. Then answer my question. Seeing his gesture, Lin Yu forced himself to calm down and nodded at Yuan Tianxing. Yuan Tianxing looked at him and asked, Let's talk about our situation first. You've probably heard about what happened at the base. In fact, almost all the major bases already knew about it. Our base is indeed gone. Our leader is currently unknown. Although I heard that he self-destructed, I wouldn't believe it unless I saw it with my own eyes. Lin Yu's expression was a little sluggish, although he was already prepared for this. However, when he heard Yuan Tianxing, their deputy leader, personally confirm this matter, he still couldn't accept it. How could it be? How could it be? Yuan Tianxing comforted him. Don't be too agitated. Except for the leader, Lin Feng and his family are all fine and have escaped here. You see, I'm actually here to look for workers. So what Yang Jianhua said is true? Lin Yu suddenly interrupted and then looked up at Yuan Tianxing. Yuan Tianxing's smiling face slowly faded when he heard Lin Yu's words. You met Yang Jianhua? He asked with a sullen face and a slight frown. Lin Yu nodded and then said angrily, Deputy Commander, didn't you ask me why I came back alone? Because the others were captured by him 2 days ago. Yuan Tianxing was stunned and asked with some shock, They were captured? What did you guys do to meet him? Lin Yu said, It was Sea City's leader Purple Thunder, Leader Wu. He received news from our base first and also knew about Captain and the others. He was going to send a team to meet them. So when we found out, we followed them even though I didn't want to believe it. Yuan Tianxing said in surprise, You said that Sea City's leader Purple Thunder sent people to meet Lin Feng and the others? But we didn't see anyone coming to meet them. Lin Yu nodded and said, Yes, he did send people out. Our entire squad also followed him out. But they didn't find the direction and route that Captain and the others were going, so we couldn't find any trace of them after searching for a few days. Instead, we met Yang Jianhua. Yuan Tianxing asked calmly, You also know about Yang Jianhua? Lin Yu said with a gloomy expression, There's no need to know. As soon as he saw us, he directly attacked without saying anything. That's why the others were either killed or captured by them. Yuan Tianxing bent over and rested his elbows on his knees. He crossed his fingers and supported his chin with the back of his hand. Then why did you escape alone? Did you escape by yourself or did he deliberately let you go? Lin Yu said, I escaped because I wasn't there at the time. So Yang Jianhua didn't see me and only captured the others. I hid on the side and watched so I wasn't discovered. Yuan Tianxing looked at him and said, You're really lucky. So you came back alone? Lin Yu nodded and said, After Yang Jianhua controlled them, he said something in front of them. I heard it from the side. A cold smile appeared on Yuan Tianxing's face and he said, What did he say? Seeing his smile, Lin Yu felt his hair stand on end. He said that Pluto Base will belong to him in the future and that he is the leader. He said that as long as you follow him, you can go back to Pluto Base. He also said that he will definitely get Miss Lin Wenwen's body and heart. Then he laughed crazily. Yuan Tianxing sneered and said, Haha, he really dares to think. His face is thicker than the city wall. Lin Yu said blankly, Why did he betray our leader? Yuan Tianxing said, Who knows? But don't worry about Lin Feng and the others. They are all fine now. Lin Yu said, I was alone and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't beat them and I couldn't save them. So I had no choice but to come back first. I didn't expect to hear that you came to find us. Yuan Tianxing said, Fortunately, you came back. Otherwise, wouldn't I have come here for nothing? Chapter 240. Lin Yu asked, By the way, why did you come to Haiqing Base? Why did you come to us? Yuan Tianxing nodded and said, Yes, we are now in a county on the border of Hangzhou City. Then we plan to build a new base. Lin Yu was stunned and looked at him with his eyes wide open. Build? A new base? Who? Yuan Tianxing said, It's us. Lin Yu asked, How many people do we have? Yuan Tianxing calculated and said, More than 10, but I came to Haiqing Base to ask for help. Maybe we can recruit some people from here. Lin Yu looked at him with a confused face. How could they build a base with more than 10 people? Where were they going to build it? On the other side, Lin Xiao and the others decided to wait for Yuan Tianqing to come back before taking action. She began to prepare to repair Qiu Lily and Xiedong's bodies. Because they didn't have a lot of energy, they let Qiu Lily find it herself. Then Lin Xiao suddenly stared at Qiu Lily's 2 followers. Lily, why don't you upgrade these 2 as well? Do you want them? Qiu Lily looked at her blankly. Them? Because Qiu Lily only let the 2 level 4 zombies stay far away, and didn't let them get close to the hotel. Because they didn't have any intelligence, they were controlled by Qiu Lily. Although their intelligence wasn't low, their beast-like nature was still very strong. If it wasn't for Qiu Lily's suppression, they probably couldn't resist the hunger and attacked others. Lin Xiao said, we need a small team of zombies to protect Lin Feng and the others. Not only can we protect Lin Feng and the others, but it can also increase our combat power. Because the next target is a zombie city with densely packed zombies. If it's just us, we may not be able to free ourselves. And in the future, the number of people in the base may increase, so the number of times we need to go in and out will also increase. At that time, we still need the deterrence of high-level zombies. Qiu Lily nodded in understanding. So it was like that. Lu Jun said with Tong Tong in his arms, first of all, let's solve their hunger. I think you can let them drink more of your lake water. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, that's what I plan to do. Of course, she knew that the energy in her lake could slowly offset the instinctive hunger of the zombies. Now that she saw the changes in Lu Jun, she didn't know if they would recover some of their memories like her. Lin Xiao also wanted to test this function. Let's go outside and test those 2. Lin Xiao took Qiu Lily downstairs to the parking lot in front of the building. Those mutant turtles were still sleeping in their cages. Lu Jun didn't follow them. Their room was facing the back, so they couldn't see the front where Lin Xiao and the others were. Seeing Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily appear in the parking lot, Lin Xiaolu, who was upstairs, looked at them curiously by the window. Then she called her aunt and mother over. Mom, Auntie, come and take a look. What are they playing down there? Lin Wenwen and Cheng Wangxue looked at her strangely and asked, who are they? Lin Xiaolu pointed below the window and turned around to say, that bald sister. And the sister who likes to wear white dresses. Lin Wenwen said, Lu Tianyu and Qiu Lily? What are they doing? As she spoke, she also walked over curiously. It's really them. What are you doing? Cheng Wangxue said, I heard that Lu Tianyu wants to strengthen her zombie squad. I think she's ready to start. Lin Wenwen turned his head and looked at her strangely. Zombie squad? What zombie squad? Cheng Wangxue shook his head. Below, Lin Xiao said to Qiu Lily, Lily, go kill 3 level 5 zombie leaders and take their cores. I think it should be enough for you. Call your sidekick over. I'll put them into the space to modify them. Since it was related to her recovery and speech, Qiu Lily immediately stopped talking. Lin Xiao's eyebrows couldn't help but twitch at her voice. After more than 10 seconds, 2 figures leaped over from afar on all fours. Then he squatted down in front of Qiu Lily. Lin Xiao looked at the 2 adult zombies, 1 male and 1 female, and squatted in front of Qiu Lily. Suddenly he felt like 2 large dogs. The 2 level 4 zombies squatted in front of Qiu Lily, and looked up at Qiu Lily with some fear. Qiu Lily raised her hand, pointed at Lin Xiao and said, from now on you have to listen to her, or she can eat you. I don't eat zombies. Lin Xiao silently looked at Qiu Lily, then raised his hand to take off his sunglasses, turned his head to look at the 2 zombies, and his eyes were stern. A cold glint flashed across her dark eyes, which had a faint green luster in them. Roar, roar. The 2 level 4 zombies immediately felt threatened, and fiercely stood up, warning Lin Xiao with a low growl. When Qiu Lily saw the 2's reaction, she immediately roared at them again. Don't be noisy. If you listen to me, I won't eat you. Roar. The 2 level 4 zombies were very afraid of Qiu Lily, and after hearing her roar, they immediately quieted down. Lin Xiao walked over, and said to the 2 level 4 zombies, extend your claws. Roar. However, the 2 level 4 zombies were very wary of her, and just stared at her and let out strange roars from their throats. Lin Xiao released her breath, and then slightly squinted at the 2 zombies. Woo! When Lin Xiao released her breath, The 2 level 4 zombies who were very wary of her suddenly wilted. They both shrunk their heads and then bent their backs. Lin Xiao, claws. This time the 2 zombies finally obediently extended their claws to her. Lin Xiao looked at the 4 claws that were still stained, and didn't know if they went to eat people. But in this area it was probably only Lin Feng's group and no one else. Seeing that the 2 of them didn't seem to be in high spirits, they probably haven't eaten for a long time. Lin Xiao raised her hand and grabbed their sleeves, which were not so dirty, and then disappeared with the 2 zombies. After Cho Lily watched them disappear, she turned her head and jumped to the top of the building, standing at the highest position on the top of the building. She closed her eyes and felt around, and then disappeared in a flash in one direction. Lin Wenwen and the others in the window said, "What are they doing?" Lu Tianyu seems to have brought 2 level 3 and 4 zombies into the space. What does she want to do? Cheng Wangxue said, "Who knows?" Lin Wenwen thoughtfully held his chin. "I feel that the 2 zombies that Lu Tianyu brought in were ordinary zombies. They are different from the others. Like those people outside who bite people on sight. Are they irrational?" Chapter 241. The space suddenly changed into a strange environment, and the 2 zombies immediately became anxious. They immediately jumped towards an open space, and then the 2 of them stuck together. While staring at Lin Xiao, they also paid attention to the surroundings. Roar, roar, roar. Lin Xiao stood in the same place and looked at the 2 with a smile. "Come here." Roar, roar. But her words were useless to the 2 zombies who only listened to Cho Lily. The 2 zombies just stood there motionlessly, warning her with a growl. Not obedient. Lin Xiao quietly looked at the 2 guys whose faces couldn't be seen, and then her eyes became cold. Suddenly she bared her teeth at them, and a pair of fangs appeared in her mouth. Roar. Seeing Lin Xiao bared her teeth, the 2 zombies immediately became obedient. Lin Xiao then kept her teeth, and then said to them, "Come here, stand properly." Then she pointed to the flat ground next to her. The 2 level 4 zombies were like 2 large dogs, rubbing against each other as they approached. Lin Xiao smelled their bodies and found that although they were very dirty, they didn't smell very bad, and there was no smell of blood. She didn't know whether it was because they hadn't eaten a living person for a long time, or because Cho Lily didn't let them eat. Although they looked a bit dirty, they didn't smell bad. This was the reason why Cho Lily was willing to let them follow her. Lin Xiao looked at the 2 obediently rubbing against each other, and then squatting in her designated position. Only then did he turn around and bring 2 large buckets over. They were huge buckets that were about 1 meter tall. Then she put them by the lake and began to fill them with water. After filling the 2 buckets with water, she dragged them to the side and laid them flat. At this time a few thick vines emerged from the lake, swaying as they swam towards Lin Xiao. After Lin Xiao filled the buckets, she waved to the 2 zombies, "Come here." The 2 zombies stood still and refused to move, and just looked at her nervously. Lin Xiao sighed and then bared her teeth at the 2, and said in a low and hoarse voice, "I said, come here, roar." Well, people don't listen to words. Then let's say corpse language. Roar. The 2 zombies were immediately terrified. They didn't know why Lin Xiao in front of them, who was obviously the same level as them, had such a strong breath. That kind of suppression from a superior was too overbearing. Lin Xiao didn't have the patience to waste time with them. His body suddenly flashed and turned into a human figure that flashed past the 2 zombies. Then he returned to the bucket. When she looked at the 2 zombies again, she discovered that the clothes on their bodies had already been torn to shreds, forming a circle of rags at the feet of the 2 zombies. Roar dash, the 2 zombies had no reaction to their clothes being cut off, but they were very dissatisfied with Lin Xiao's sudden approach. Lin Xiao held his chin and looked at the 2 of them. The muscles on his body had become dry and his skin was twitching. She turned her head and looked at the bucket beside her. Asking them to sit in the bucket by themselves? Was that even possible? Lin Xiao shook his head. Could it be that he had to bring them in for a bath? Suddenly, she felt something crawling up her feet. She looked down. Oh, it's little man Maya, can I eat them? Although they don't have a lot of energy. Little man's voice sounded in Lin Xiao's mind. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, no, little man. They can't be eaten. But, can you help me put them in the bucket? It seems like they don't want to listen to me. Little man was confused and said, Put them in the bucket? Why do you want to put them in the bucket? Lin Xiao said. Because I want to give them a bath. Although little Man didn't really understand Lin Xiao's request, she was still very willing to help. Oh, then I'll do it. After saying that, she pulled out 2 vines and threw them towards the 2 naked zombies. Then before the 2 zombies could react, she directly tied their hands and feet and lifted them up. Roar, 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 dash. Roar, 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 dash. The 2 zombies, who were suddenly tied up, reacted after being lifted up, and then struggled and twisted with all their might, while screaming in panic. In the next second, they were tied up and stuffed into the bucket filled with water. Walalal dash, the water in the bucket was squeezed out by the 2. Lin Xiao stood on the side and shouted to the 2, "Don't move, sit down." At the same time she was thinking about how to make these 2 also listen to her. But she didn't know that the faint green light in her eyes suddenly darkened as she stared at the 2 zombies. The 2 zombies that were stared at by her green eyes suddenly quieted down. Then they sat like 2 large dogs, their 4 black eyes staring straight at Lin Xiao. Huh? Obedient? Lin Xiao looked at them in surprise. Her control over zombies seemed to be useless against level 2 and above zombies, so she didn't plan to control these 2 level 4 zombies. But she didn't expect that these 2 would suddenly become obedient, as if she could control their minds. Was it because of her recent restoration that increased the effect? Lin Xiao leaned in front of the 2, looking left and right. Then she said to the male zombie, "Raise your hands." Sure enough, the male zombie obediently raised his hands, but it stretched them out like a zombie. Then it looked at Lin Xiao with a blank face. Lin Xiao couldn't sense its thoughts, so she didn't know if the zombies under her control had entered a resting state. It was like hypnosis. She continued to say to the male zombie, "Bend your hands and use your palms to wash your face." She didn't know if this zombie could completely understand what she meant. Before Lin Xiao finished thinking, she saw the male zombie bend his 2 hands, and then sink his palms into the water, and then he cupped his palms up. So he just threw it on her face. Lin Xiao. After the male zombie finished, he continued cupping water and then continued to throw it on her face. Lin Xiao stood up, turned her head and said to the female zombie, "You do the same as him." After she finished speaking, the female zombie turned her head and looked at the male zombie. She also followed and threw water on her face, but after she was done, she would wipe her face a few times. Lin Xiao looked at her in surprise. Hey! This female zombie's ability to understand was better than the male zombies. Little man used another vine to grab Lin Xiao's wrist, and asked her, "Mama, why did you let them soak in the bath? Do you want me to eat them after washing them clean?" Lin Xiao said to her helplessly, "They are not for you to eat. I want to modify and train them, so that they can help us in the future." Little man replied as if she understood everything, "Oh, I see. Then why do we need to soak in the bath?" Lin Xiao said, "Because we need to use the energy in the lake to modify their bodies, and then slowly train their minds. In the future, we might need you to repair them and see if you can help them recover a little of their memories." Little man nodded her head in understanding. "Oh, I can do that, but little man doesn't have any energy left. Don't I still need to help repair the lily zombie in the white dress?" Lin Xiao smiled. "I know, don't worry. We will help you find the energy." Little man. Oh. Chapter 242. Lin Xiao said to her, "Call Lily big sister, don't call me zombie. Little man obediently replied, "Oh." Lin Xiao stood next to the bucket, squinting her eyes to look at the energy in the bucket. After looking for a while, she saw that the energy was slowly seeping into the bodies of the 2 zombies. Thinking for a moment, she turned to find a cup and filled it with water by the lake. Then she walked to the side of the female zombie and saw that she was about to wash her face. Okay, you can stop now," Lin Xiao said to the female zombie who had washed her face. Although most of the stains on her face were washed away, the scar on her face was getting more and more clear. There was a wound on her forehead where the flesh was bitten off, and the white bone could be seen. Her eyes were sunken, and there were huge black circles like a panda's. Looking closely, her face was still very pretty and very young. Lin Xiao raised her hand to hold her chin, and pinched her cheeks with his fingers. It made her open her mouth. Roar dash, the female zombie's throat made a muffled sound, but she still obediently opened her mouth. A foul odor came out of her mouth, and one could see her teeth, which had sharpened. Lin Xiao tilted her head and waited for the stench to dissipate a bit before pouring the water in the cup into her mouth. Gulu, awurawa gulu. The female zombie was reluctant to swallow the water at first, and there was a strange sound coming from her throat. But Lin Xiao forced her to drink it all. When he was about to get the second cup, he suddenly felt that the female zombie was a bit strange. Awurawa awu. Awu. Although it was just repeating the meaning of these two words, it made Lin Xiao feel surprised. She still wanted to drink more? There was actually a zombie that wanted to drink this lake water? Why didn't Shou Lily and Jun want to drink it before? Lin Xiao squinted his eyes and looked at the thick green energy that was rolling around in the bucket. Was it because of the energy? This time, little Man seemed to have grown a bit stronger, and the energy in the lake also increased a few times. Awoo. Seeing that Lin Xiao didn't move, the female zombie suddenly became a bit anxious. It howled at her. Lin Xiao looked at her speechlessly. The wound on her forehead was especially obvious. Why are you so anxious? It's not like you're a child who can't get candy. Alright. It seems that the IQ of level 3 and 4 zombies is indeed like that of a child. Lin Xiao released her and turned to fill the lake with water. As a result, when he returned, he saw this guy lowering his head and gulping the water in the bucket. Hey, don't drink this. If you drink this, how are you going to soak in it? Lin Xiao quickly pinched her face and lifted it up. As he poured the water in the cup into her mouth, he said, "It's useless to drink so much. Drink this first today." He would drink it tomorrow after he finished absorbing it. You are not allowed to drink from the bucket. It's all your bathwater. Do you know how dirty you are? Lin Xiao looked at the zombie and wondered if it would wake up in the future. Would he remember this when he woke up? After drinking a glass of water, Lin Xiao said to her, "Alright, don't drink any more today. It's a waste to drink it." Then she turned to fill another glass of water and poured 2 glasses of water into the male zombie's mouth. The male zombie didn't seem to be very old. He looked to be in his 20s. His reaction seemed to be much slower than this female zombie. After drinking a glass, he didn't have the same expression as the female zombie. After drinking the male zombie, he turned around and saw the female zombie lowering her head and gulping her bathwater. Lin Xiao inexplicably remembered the time when she was soaking in the lake. It was a bit disgusting. You're drinking again. Don't drink anymore. Although he felt a bit disgusted, Lin Xiao's mouth didn't stop yelling at the female zombie. Roar! The female zombie was stopped by her yelling. Although she was very dissatisfied, she didn't lower her head to drink anymore. Lin Xiao walked around the 2 zombies and suddenly reached out her hand to pinch their muscles. It was hard, but there was a strange elasticity inside. It felt like the zombies' muscles had become hard gel. She turned to Little Man and said, "Little Man, look after them and don't let them escape." The other vines of Little Man waved at her in the water, indicating that they had received the order. Lin Xiao turned around and walked out of the space. Then she turned around and saw the big iron cage. She had asked Long Qingying to make a cage for the turtles. There were a few in there and there were still a few inside. Although she told Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying that they could eat these turtles, no one really paid attention to her. Seeing these turtles, Lin Xiao thought that she hadn't eaten for a few days. So she squatted next to the iron cage and looked at the turtles that were huddled together. At this time, a person walked out of the hotel lobby. It was Lu Jun holding Tong Tong. "Are you hungry?" As soon as she came out, she saw Lin Xiao squatting next to the cage. Lu Jun laughed and said. Lin Xiao nodded a little. Lu Jun said, "How many days has it been?" "It hasn't even been a week." Lin Xiao turned her head and looked at her. "Aren't you hungry?" "Before I saw them, I didn't feel like eating much. But keeping them is keeping them. Let's cook them and eat them." Lu Jun looked at her strangely and said, "Cook? Do you eat cooked ones now?" Lin Xiao pointed to Tong Tong in her arms and said, "The cooked ones are for him to eat. Turtle soup is very nutritious." Lu Jun turned his head to look at his son and replied, "Oh." Lin Xiao looked at her, turned around and reached out to lift the bottom of the cage. Then she went in. Bang! She put down the cage and walked to the pile of big turtles. She picked up one of them and disappeared from the cage in a flash. Lu Jun thought that she wanted to go into the space to cook, but she didn't expect to come out again the next second. Then she came out of the cage again. Lin Xiao walked towards her and said, "Let's go back to the room first. I'll go to the kitchen to find some salt." Previously, Du Yuanxing and the others had found some refined salt that had been preserved very well, even though it had only been 5 years. Although it had only been 5 years, the shelf life of this salt was 5 years. Although it had just expired, in this era it was already good to have mutated salt to eat. It didn't matter if it had expired or not. Oh, Lu Jun nodded and then followed them into the hotel. Lin Xiao found the kitchen of the restaurant. After the solar power was restored, there were still some equipment in the kitchen that could be used. So Lin Feng and the others directly cooked the food here and then brought it up to eat. Or they could sit around the table in the dining hall below and eat. With Lin Xiao and Xiao Lily's suppression, not only did the zombies not dare to enter the hotel, there were no zombies within a few hundred meters of the hotel. So Lin Feng and the others gradually became less nervous and could freely move around in the hotel. Chapter 243. After finding a jar and filling it with some salt in the kitchen, Lin Xiao entered the space and looked at the turtle that she had turned upside down on the shore of the lake. She squatted beside the turtle and turned it over. She wanted to chop off its head first, but the turtle refused to stick its head out, so Lin Xiao had to kill it directly. The big turtle, which had not moved at first, suddenly seemed to notice some danger. Suddenly, as if it had sensed some danger, it stretched out its head and legs to struggle. Lin Xiao just saw the time when its head came out and cut it with her claws. Then the turtle's head fell to the ground. Then she used the tip of her nails to draw a line on the thin shell of the side of the turtle. Finally, she pressed the line with her hand. Crack, crack, crack. With a few soft sounds, the turtle shell on this side cracked. Lin Xiao broke one side with one hand and then tore it hard. It was easily torn into 2 pieces. The smell of water suddenly intensified. She didn't know if it was because they had not touched water for a few days in the cage. She felt that the smell of water seemed to be a little lighter. Lin Xiao used her nails to cut a piece of fresh meat and put it in her mouth. It was smooth and tasted a little fishy, but her taste now seemed to be different from before. The taste before was not so strong. After eating one piece, she continued to cut another piece and put it in her mouth. Then she couldn't stop until half of the turtle meat was eaten by her. Then she remembered that she wanted to cook it for Tong Tong. So Lin Xiao hurriedly washed the rest of the meat. Because there was no other seasoning, only salt. Lin Xiao had to cook the potatoes and turtle meat together. Finally, she put some vegetables in it to taste better. She thought of Tong Tong and Xiao Lu. She thought of Xiao Lu, her parents' grandmother, Aunt Long Qingying and a bunch of people. Okay, let them drink the soup. She thought of adding people, so she had to add vegetables. So she washed some vegetables and put them in. Then he cooked a big pot of it. Finally, Lin Xiao came out with a big pot of turtle soup from the space. Lin Xiao didn't smell the cooked food, but Tong Tong seemed to have discovered something. As soon as Lin Xiao entered the room with the pot, he twitched his nose and began to sniff left and right. "Mom, it smells so good." His eyes were glued to the pot in Lin Xiao's hand, and then he tugged on Lu Jun's pants. Lu Jun felt Lin Xiao walk in, but just like Lin Xiao, she didn't smell anything. Hearing her son's voice, she turned to look at Lin Xiao. Then Lin Xiao came in with a big pot of steaming hot soup. "It's done? So many," Lin Xiao said. "Take a bigger bowl and take Tong Tong's portion out. I'll give the rest to those people. My Xiaolu is still too thin. I have to give her some supplements." Lu Jun smiled and nodded, then gently pulled Tong Tong away from his lap. She said, "Tong Tong, be a good boy. Sit down and wait for Mama to prepare some delicious soup for you." Hearing that there was delicious soup, Tong Tong sat on the sofa obediently. Lu Jun got up and took 2 stainless steel bowls, one big and one small, from the cabinet next to her. Then she filled the big bowl with soup and vegetables. "Well, these are enough for Tong Tong. You can take the rest." Lin Xiao nodded and then went out of the room with a big pot of soup. He walked to Lin Feng's room. When he arrived at Lin Feng's room, there was no one in the room, and he didn't know where they went. Lin Xiao brought the soup in and put it on the table. Then he sensed the atmosphere and found that everyone was on the first floor. By the way, it was time for lunch. They were all eating downstairs. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and left a note next to the soup pot. It was written that the soup was made by the turtles downstairs for them to drink. As for whether they dared to drink it or not, it was their business. However, after Lin Xiao put down the note, her expression suddenly changed slightly. She turned to the door and looked in the direction of the stairwell in confusion. After waiting for a while, she saw someone coming up from downstairs. Lin Feng, Mrs. Lin, and Long Qingying walked up, and there was no unusual reaction on their faces. However, Lin Xiaolu, who was on Lin Feng's back, seemed to be very listless. When they came up, they found Lin Xiao standing at the door of their room. They walked over and asked in surprise, "Hey, Miss Lu Tianyu, are you looking for us?" Lin Xiao pointed to the table in the room and said, "I wanted to cook some soup for Tong Tong, but I thought of Xiaolu. So I cooked some more and brought it to you. But you can go down to eat." As she spoke, she stood aside and glanced at Lin Xiaolu. Lin Feng smiled and said, "Oh, thank you. We've just eaten. Why don't you take it back for Tong Tong to drink?" Lin Xiao spread out her hands and said, "Even if Tong Tong drinks it tomorrow or the day after, he won't be able to finish it." Lin Feng and the others walked in to have a look. Well, it was a big pot. Mrs. Lin looked at Lin Xiao and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. We're just half full. It should be able to hold it with some soup." Lin Xiao nodded repeatedly. Everyone went to the sofa and sat down. Mrs. Lin picked up the note and looked at it. A dark light flashed in her eyes, but she quickly covered it up. She turned to Lin Xiao and said with a smile, "Is this made by the mutant turtles below? It's okay for us to eat it, right?" Lin Xiao walked in, leaned against the door and said, "Believe me, it'll be fine. Besides, I've let Tong Tong drink it. Tong Tong has been fine. However, I'm curious now. What's wrong with Xiaolu? She looks listless." In fact, Lin Xiao saw that Lin Xiaolu was not just listless. She had already fainted. Lin Feng put Lin Xiaolu on the sofa and patted her little face with a strange look. "Xiaolu? Hey, why did you fall asleep?" But he didn't care much, thinking that Lin Xiaolu had fallen asleep. He put her on the sofa and let her lie down. Mrs. Lin said, "Xiaolu looked a little listless when she was eating just now. I don't know if she's tired." Lin Xiao squinted his eyes and looked at Lin Xiaolu. There was energy slowly seeping out from the depths of her body. A small amount of this energy seeped into Lin Xiaolu's blood, flesh, and meridians. It seemed to be gathering. Lin Feng turned to look at the hot soup on the table. A fragrance assailed his nostrils, but he didn't look like he was going to drink it. Mrs. Lin suddenly said with a smile, "Lin Feng, drink it. I think it's fine." She looked at Lin Xiao with an inexplicable look. Lin Xiao pretended not to notice and said with a smile, "It's okay. It's normal if you don't dare to drink it. After all, it's a mutant turtle. But I can feel whether there are viruses in the bodies of those mutant animals or plants. That's why I let Tong Tong eat these things. Maybe it's impossible for me to say this, but it's also one of my abilities." Chapter 244. Lin Feng and the others looked at each other and then looked at Lin Xiao thoughtfully. Then he nodded with a look of realization. "I see. That's great. Then you'll be able to detect what can and can't be eaten like a detector," Lin Xiao's mother said half-jokingly. Lin Xiao raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "I don't mind if you say that. But now is not the time to talk about this. I feel that something is wrong with Xiaolu." Lin Feng and his mother were stunned and then turned to look at Lin Xiaolu. They turned to look at Lin Xiaolu in confusion and found nothing unusual. "What's wrong?" He looked back at Lin Xiao and asked in confusion. Lin Xiao loosened his hands and walked over, saying, "Feel her forehead. Is it starting to feel hot?" Lin Feng turned his head and tentatively reached out his hand to touch his daughter's head. Then his face darkened slightly. Seeing her son's reaction, Lin Xiao's mother was worried. She asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" Lin Feng looked at his daughter's sleeping face and said, "It's hot. How do you know?" He immediately turned to look at Lin Xiao. Hearing this, Lin Xiao's mother couldn't sit still. She quickly stood up and leaned over, then pushed Lin Feng's hand away. She reached out to touch it and found that it was really hot. "Xiaolu? Xiaolu, wake up. Xiaolu?" Lin Xiao's mother gently patted Xiaolu's little face and wanted to wake her up. However, after calling her a few times, Lin Xiaolu didn't respond, not even her eyelids moved. "What? What's wrong? Lin Xiao's mother frowned and said anxiously. Long Qingying, who had been standing on the side, also came over and looked at Lin Xiao and Xiaolu with doubt and worry. Lin Feng looked at Xiaolu and also bent over to call her Xiaolu. Xiaolu? Xiaolu, wake up. Look at Daddy. Lin Xiaolu still didn't respond. They immediately panicked and kept shaking her shoulders and calling her. Lin Xiao walked over and pulled Lin Feng away. Don't call her. Xiaolu has fainted. Lin Fenglin's mother looked at her in surprise. She's fine. How did she faint? Mother Lin suddenly looked at Lin Xiao and said, by the way, water. Can't the water you gave me heal me? Lin Xiao shook his head and said, my water should be useless because she seems to be preparing to awaken her ability. Lin Feng and Madame Lin stared at her at the same time and said in surprise, what did you say? Awakening an arcana? Lin Xiao squinted at the energy in Lin Xiaolu's body and nodded. Mother Lin said in disbelief, how can this be? Xiaolu is still so young. How can she awaken her ability? There were people who awakened their abilities after the apocalypse, but there were almost no children. Those who had awakened were all adults. He had never heard of children. Lin Feng's expression turned serious. If a child wanted to awaken his ability, he wouldn't even be able to pass the stage of fever. Because a child's physical strength was not as good as an adult's, it was possible for the child to burn out. Lin Xiao knew what Lin Feng was worried about. She said, Lin Feng, take Xiaolu into my space. I have a way to control it. Lin Feng's eyes lit up as he lifted his head to look at her. Mrs. Lin asked in confusion, why do we have to enter your space? Is there anything that you can't take out of the space? Lin Xiao looked at her and shook her head. You can't take it out. You can only follow me into the space. Mother Lin looked at her hesitantly and then looked at Lin Feng, waiting for him to make a decision. She didn't know whether she should trust Lin Xiao now. Even though Lin Xiao had saved them. Although Lin Xiao had saved them, she was still worried that there might be something abnormal if they entered the space. Lin Feng frowned and looked at Lin Xiao. Then he suddenly turned to Mother Lin and said, Mom, I believe her. At least we can't do anything now. Xiaolu can't wait too long. Mother Lin stared at him nervously. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Lin Feng once again leaned over and touched Lin Xiaolu's forehead. He found that his daughter's temperature had risen again in just a few words. He quickly picked up his daughter and then looked at Lin Xiao and asked, okay, what should I do? Lin Xiao raised her hand to stop him and said, you don't need to do anything. Just hold the child. After saying that, he disappeared with Lin Feng and Lin Xiaolu. Only Mother Lin was left waiting anxiously in the same place. At this time Lin Wenwen and Cheng Wangxue also came up. As soon as they came in, they looked around the room. They found that Lin Xiaolu and Lin Feng were nowhere to be seen. Hey, where are Lin Feng and Xiaolu? Mom, what's wrong with you? Cheng Wangxue asked curiously. Then she found that Mother Lin's expression was a little strange. She asked quickly. Lin Wenwen originally smelled the fragrance of some soup, but then she saw a pot on the coffee table in front of the sofa in the room. Just as she was about to go over to take a look, she suddenly heard Cheng Wangshue's words. She was stunned for a moment before turning her attention to her mother. She found that her mother seemed to be standing there anxiously. She didn't know what was going on. Mother Lin clasped her hands in front of her chest, looked at the two of them and said, "Oh, Xiaolu suddenly had a fever and fainted." Lu Tianyu said that Xiaolu seemed to be ready to awaken her special ability. And then she brought Lin Feng and Xiaolu into her space. I don't know what will happen next. What? Awakening special ability? The expressions of the two changed when they heard this. Cheng Wangxue cried out involuntarily. Lin Wenwen also looked at Mother Lin in disbelief. How did Xiaolu suddenly awaken her special ability? She's only 7 years old. She's still too young. What should we do? When awakening special ability, it seems that the body temperature will rise very high. Even adults can be burned, Xiaolu. Indeed, when awakening special ability, the success rate in a zombie group was only 10% or 20%, but in humans it was not 100% successful. Only 70% of people could successfully wake up and then use their special ability. But there were still 20% or 30% of people who did not successfully awaken. In the end, they either went crazy or became stupid because of the high fever, Or they directly became brain dead and became a vegetable, or they really died. So speaking of Xiaolu, who was so young now, actually awakened special ability. No wonder Mother Lin was anxious and helpless. Cheng Wangxue suddenly looked at Mother Lin with eyes full of hope and said, "Does Lu Qianyu have any way? Is it? Otherwise, why would she bring Lin Feng and Xiaolu into the space?" Mother Lin shook her head and said blankly and worriedly, "I don't know. She said it might be possible, but there's no guarantee." Lin Wenwen pulled Cheng Wangxue to the side and let her sit on the sofa. Then he pulled his mother to sit down. He sighed and comforted her, "Don't worry, they're still big brother. They will definitely find a way to wake up Xiaolu smoothly." Although he said so, Lin Wenwen felt that these words were not convincing to himself. Chapter 245. After entering the space, Lin Xiao brought Lin Feng to the lakeside. Lin Feng had been unconscious the last time he had entered, so this was the first time he had seen Lin Xiao's spatial environment. He observed the surroundings while paying attention to Lin Xiao's movements. This space was bigger than he had imagined, and there was actually a lake. On the other side was a large meadow and a strange forest at the edge. On the other side of the grass there was a lot of furniture, kitchen utensils, etc. On the other side of the meadow was a pile of what looked like mutant pumpkins and potatoes. If she put them in this space, they should all be edible. Right next to where they were standing, there was a stove set up with a stone, a chair, and some buckets and pots. There were many living conditions everywhere in this space. How could he come in? If he wanted water, he had lakes. If he wanted food, he had pumpkins and potatoes. Lin Xiao stood by the lake and suddenly shouted towards the lake, "Little man." Lin Feng looked at Lin Xiao strangely. He didn't know what she meant by that. Was it like she was calling someone or something? Then, a few vines as thick as an arm suddenly burst out of the originally calm lake. Then, the vines swayed a few times on the surface of the water and extended towards them. Lin Feng subconsciously took a step back. He had a bad feeling. Lin Xiao turned his head to look at him and said, "What are you afraid of?" "This is Little Vine. A vine that lives in my spatial lake. Although I didn't know what breed it was intelligent. Moreover, the lake's healing effect is also due to its help." Lin Feng felt slightly relieved after hearing Lin Xiao's words. After all, it was not an unknown object and it was related to healing. Lin Xiao looked at Little Man stretching its vines over and continued to say to Lin Feng, "Little Man won't hurt people if you don't provoke it. Little Man wouldn't hurt people, but she would still eat people." Lin Xiao didn't tell Lin Feng about this, afraid that he would overreact. Lin Feng calmed down and placed Lin Xiaolu on the chair beside him. He then touched her forehead and found that it was indeed hotter than before. It felt very hot even when he touched it with his hands. Soon he was not in the mood to care about anything else. He was only thinking about his daughter's situation and what to do next. "You said you have a solution. What is it?" Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, "I don't have the solution. I have to ask Little Man." At this moment the vine avoided Lin Feng and slid towards Lin Xiao. Then he reached out and climbed up her leg, then gently wrapped it around her wrist. Mama, this person is the one you brought in last time. Who is this little sister?" Lin Xiao said in his heart, "This person is my big brother, and little sister is my niece. But don't tell him, it's our secret." Little Man didn't seem to understand, so she replied, "Oh, is little sister asleep?" Lin Xiao said, "The energy in little Missy's body doesn't seem to be normal. Go and see if you can help sort out the energy in her body." She was about to awaken her ability. Lin Feng watched as the vines wrapped around Lin Xiao's hand, but he didn't make a sound. He just watched his daughter quietly, which made him a little confused. At this time, Lin Xiao opened his mouth and said, "Let Little Man take a look at little Lu's physical condition. Right now, her energy is beginning to become chaotic." Because there was more and more energy, Lin Xiaolu's body temperature was getting higher and higher. Lin Feng looked at her with some hesitation and said, "Are you sure?" Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Yes, I'm sure. You can only trust me now, right?" She knew that Lin Feng didn't have any other way, so she could only trust herself. Although he didn't know what the consequences would be, he didn't believe that this vine could save Xiaolu. Lin Xiao pointed at Lin Xiaolu and said, "Little Man, go and see if you can wake her up." Lin Feng was a little puzzled by Lin Xiao talking to a plant, but he didn't say anything. Okay, little Man responded. She didn't fall off her wrist and slide to the ground. Instead, she used the other vine to slide towards Lin Xiaolu. Seeing that the vine was really coming towards him, Lin Feng couldn't help but become a little nervous. But he could only trust Lin Xiao, so he couldn't do anything else. Lin Feng watched the vine with 2 small leaves at the tip slide to his daughter's feet like a snake, and then wrapped around Lin Xiaolu's ankle. Then the 2 leaves on the tip shook a few times. After a few seconds, little Man said to Lin Xiao, "Mama, I can help her filter the energy, but I have to get her to the bottom of the lake." Lin Xiao nodded, then looked at Lin Feng and said, "Little Man said that we need to filter the energy in Xiaolu's body, but we have to move her to the lake." Lin Feng didn't quite understand what she meant and asked, "What do you mean by moving her to the lake? Are you going to put Xiaolu in the lake?" Lin Xiao said, "Yes, we have to put Xiaolu at the bottom of the lake. But don't worry, she will be fine. Little Man should be able to control her respiratory system so that it won't be blocked." Lin Feng's eyes widened, and he couldn't believe what Lin Xiao said. Putting his daughter to the bottom of the lake? What would happen? He didn't know how deep the lake was, and he didn't know what was in the lake. What if something happened? His face darkened, and he didn't say anything. Lin Feng really didn't believe what Lin Xiao said. But thinking that he couldn't do anything about his daughter, he didn't know whether he should choose to believe Lin Xiao or not. What if something happened to his daughter after she went down? But soon Lin Feng chose to believe Lin Xiao. Because of the current situation, he didn't believe that there was no hope for his daughter's situation. At least he believed that she still had a hope. He couldn't just watch his daughter's body temperature rise higher and higher, and then watch her burn. He nodded and said, "Yes, but..." He looked at Lin Xiao's eyes, and it was obvious that he wanted to say something. If something happened to his daughter, he would probably fight Lin Xiao to the death. Lin Xiao just shrugged and nodded to him indifferently. But in his heart he was cursing why every time he wanted to save someone, he would be suspected. This good person. Bah, this good zombie was really hard to be. Thinking about it was one thing, but he still said to little Man, "Okay, little Man, you can move." Hearing the order, little Man immediately moved the other branches over. Then he lifted Lin Xiaolu up from the chair and moved her into the lake. Although Lin Feng's expression was still calm, he closely stared at Lin Xiaolu's figure. But his heart was already in his throat, and he was very worried, but he couldn't do anything. Chapter 246. Little Man moved Lin Xiaolu 1 meter above the center of the lake, and then more branches came out of the lake. Slowly it rolled her into a spring roll shape, and then sank Lin Xiaolu into the lake in front of the 2. Lin Xiao turned around and glanced at Lin Feng's tightly clenched fist, but didn't say anything. She sensed that little Man had brought Lin Xiaolu into the lake. She couldn't sense the energy in Lin Xiaolu's body very clearly, but she faintly felt that after she entered the lake, the energy in her body seemed to calm down after a few seconds. At this moment, Lin Xiao and Lin Feng were like family members waiting outside the operating room. Their hearts were filled with hope and worry, but they couldn't do anything. They could only stand by the lake and wait anxiously. Lin Xiao wasn't that nervous, because she could sense the situation in the lake, even though it wasn't clear. And Lin Feng's mood was like an ant on a hot pan, but he still calmed down and didn't panic. Lin Xiao looked at him and felt a bit sorry. She said, after Xiaolu entered the water, the energy in her body calmed down. "Little Man still has a way. Xiaolu shouldn't be in any danger. You don't have to worry too much." Lin Feng was stunned and looked up at her. Hearing her say that, he didn't know why his heart suddenly calmed down a little. He let out a sigh of relief, and then realized that Lin Xiao was talking to him to make him less nervous. "Thank you." Lin Feng looked at Lin Xiao's dark eyes and said with a bit of sincere gratitude. Lin Xiao nodded at him and continued to look at the lake. Then she closed her eyes and carefully sensed the situation in the lake. After a while, she opened her eyes and said, "Although Xiaolu's situation has calmed down, it may not be that fast to filter out the excess energy and stimulate her energy core, so he had to wait patiently." Lin Feng nodded at her and suddenly asked, "You can feel the situation at the bottom of the lake?" Lin Xiao said, "I can feel a little bit, but it's not clear." Lin Feng looked at her and didn't say anything more. He just turned his head and stared at the lake like her. Although he said he had to wait patiently, after half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, Lin Feng's mood started to become anxious again. He looked at Lin Xiao a few times, but Lin Xiao explained the situation in the lake before he could speak. Lin Feng slowly calmed down as he listened to her explanation of the situation in the lake. The two of them were relatively calm by the lake, but the group of people outside could not, because Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily weren't there. Cheng Wangxue and the rest waited in their room for an hour or two. They were already extremely anxious. In the end, he couldn't help but run to Lu Jun's room and find her. Fearing that they might do something irrational to Lu Jun, Xiedong, who had been staying in the house, also appeared. He stayed by Lu Jun's side to protect her. Can she really solve my Xiao Lu's problem? But it had been almost 2 hours. Why was there still no movement? Really, why didn't you come out and tell us about the current situation? I'm so anxious. Mother Lin paced back and forth in the middle of the room, clasping her hands as she spoke anxiously. Lu Jun sat on the sofa and held Tong Tong, who was playing on her lap. She comforted her and said, "Madam, don't worry. Our captain must have a way. Otherwise she wouldn't have brought Xiao Lu in. When they come out, Xiao Lu might already be a psychic." And the youngest one, Cheng Wangxue, who was sitting next to her, had a tense face. She clenched her legs tightly on her knees, trying to suppress her panic. She listened to Lu Jun's words to convince herself that what Lu Jun said was true. Lin Wenwen looked at Cheng Wangxue, then at her mother, and then at Lu Jun. She was also very worried, but she didn't know what to say to comfort them, so she could only wait anxiously. Long Qingying, who didn't have much of a presence, suddenly said, "I believe in Junjun's words. Xiao Lu will be fine." Perhaps it was because Lin Xiao had saved her several times before and entered her space. She looked at Tong Tong, who was in Lu Jun's arms, living well. Long Qingying inexplicably believed that Lin Xiao must have a way to help Lin Xiaolu. Hearing Long Qingying's words, everyone calmed down a little. After another 2 hours, everyone began to feel restless again. This time it was Cheng Wangshua's turn to stand up and walk back and forth in front of the window behind the sofa. While Mother Lin sat on the sofa and kept sighing, Lin Wenwen leaned towards Long Qingying and asked her in a low voice, "Can she really wake Xiaolu up? And did Xiaolu really awaken a psychic? How could she awaken a psychic out of nowhere? It shouldn't be." Long Qingying looked at her and said, "I don't know either, but she has something in the lake. She said she brought it into the space, so she should be looking for a way to find the thing in the lake." Thinking back to when Yang Cheng was thrown into the lake and sucked dry, Long Qingying felt a little creeped out. Now Long Qingying felt a little creeped out. At this time Lu Jun turned to the two of them and said, "You forgot that we are all zombies. Our captain is very sensitive to energy. If she said it was an awakened psychic, then it must be. And Long Qingying is right, she probably went to find little man to find a way. And since she hasn't come out after so long, it means that there is progress. Otherwise, she would have come out long ago." Hearing this, everyone's heart lit up. Yes, it has been so long, it means that there is still a lot of hope. If not, then she should have sent Xiao Lu and Lin Feng out a long time ago. Lin Wenwen asked curiously, "Who is little man?" Long Qingying looked at Lu Jun and asked, "Could it be the one in the lake?" Lu Jun nodded and smiled. "Yes, don't worry. Ever since the dark circles under Lu Jun's eyes disappeared, she looked a lot more spirited. Except that her face was a little pale, and there were some traces of blood under her skin. She was almost no different from a normal person. Of course, her eyes were still dark and gloomy, unique to zombies. When she smiled, it gave people a very warm feeling. If I ignore her eyes?" After being comforted, everyone waited patiently for a few more hours, until the sky outside became dark. At this time there was a movement in Lin Xiao's space. A violent shock shook from the bottom of the lake, and the water on the lake's surface immediately shook violently. Lin Xiao stared at the center of the lake and suddenly said, "Yes, it's coming up." Lin Feng's spirit was lifted, and he suddenly looked at her and asked, "Then is Xiao Lu?" Lin Xiao looked at him with a smile and nodded. She said, "It's okay, that shock was formed by Xiao Lu's energy core. So now little man is going to send her up." Hearing this, Lin Feng relaxed a lot. Then he looked at the lake with a face full of hope. Chapter 247. Soon, the water in the center of the lake began to surge again. Then, a vine wrapped around Lin Xiaolu's smooth body emerged from the water, and then carried her face up on the surface of the water towards Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao quickly went to Cho Lily's wardrobe to find a towel and a dress. Lin Feng had already picked up Lin Xiaolu from Little Vine's branches, and was carrying her to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao stood by the sofa, waiting for him to carry her over and lay her flat on the sofa. He then used a towel to wipe off the water droplets on Lin Xiaolu's body. Lin Feng hugged his daughter's naked body. Although he was a little curious as to why his daughter's clothes were gone, he still felt a little strange. However, he was more concerned about the child's physical condition. His body temperature had returned to normal, and it was still a little low. His breathing was steady and his heart was normal. He lifted his eyelids. His pupils were still constricted. There was nothing wrong with him. Only then did Lin Feng truly feel relieved. After cleaning Lin Xiaolu's body, Lin Xiao helped her put on her clothes. Then he helped her dry her wet hair. Lin Feng didn't notice Lin Xiao's movements just now. Now that he had calmed down, he saw Lin Xiao's skillful movements. A thought flashed in his mind, and a certain speculation deepened. He asked, "When will little Lu wake up?" While drying Lin Xiaolu's hair, Lin Xiao said, "Well, I think we'll have to wait for another hour or two. Try to sense her forehead. You should be able to sense the energy core." She didn't need to touch Lin Xiaolu's forehead to know, but now she was curious about the type of Lin Xiaolu's ability. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, Lin Feng immediately put his hand on the child's forehead. He slightly adjusted the energy in his body and concentrated it on his daughter's palm. Sure enough, he sensed a slight energy fluctuation coming from Lin Xiaolu's head. It's true. Little Lu really has a special ability, he murmured in shock. At this time, Little Vine's vine suddenly wrapped around Lin Xiao's hand and sent him a message. Soon it loosened, and all the vines of the little vine retracted into the lake. Lin Xiao's expression froze for a moment, but he did not show any other abnormalities. She looked at Lin Feng and said, "All right, you can carry Xiao Lu. I'll send you out. The people outside are going crazy with anxiety." Thinking of the outside world, he immediately thought of Mama Lin and the others. Lin Feng hurriedly carried the child in his arms and stood up. When Lin Xiao saw that he was holding the child, she pulled his shoulder and rushed out. While everyone was waiting anxiously, two people suddenly flashed out of the house. Everyone was stunned for a moment before they reacted. "Lin Feng, how's Xiao Lu?" Cheng Wangxue immediately jumped up. If it wasn't for her holding him down tightly, she was about to collapse. Mama Lin, Lin Wenwen, and the others quickly gathered around. Several hands reached out to touch Lin Xiaolu, afraid that they would touch a cold body. Lin Xiao looked at Xie Dong standing beside Lu Jun and nodded to the two of them. Then he turned to the others and said, all right. Xiao Lu is fine now, don't worry. Now, put the child on the bed and cover him with a blanket. He'll wake up when his body warms up." Mama Lin, Cheng Wangxue, and the others all touched Lin Xiaolu's body. Although the temperature was a little low, fortunately it wasn't cold. Only then did everyone feel as if a huge stone had been lifted from their hearts. "Sigh, I'm dying of anxiety. Fortunately. Mama Lin patted her chest and said, "Is Xiao Lu okay? Will there be any problems? Will her brain or other parts of her body be burned? Or will there be any problems after she wakes up?" Cheng Wangxue still looked worried as she followed Lin Feng and asked, "Does this mean that Xiao Lu has really become a paranormal?" "Sai, the youngest arcanist. If we nurture him well, he'll definitely be one of us. If we train her well, then wait for her to grow up. Won't she be very powerful?" Lin Wenwen stood on the side and asked curiously. Lin Feng carried the child to the bed, and the others helped to lift the blanket. After he put the child down, they covered him again. Lin Xiao said, "It's okay, there's nothing wrong with Xiao Lu, and her body is better than every one of you here. Let her rest for a while and she'll wake up soon." At this time, Lin Feng turned to Lin Xiao and said seriously, "Thank you. You've saved our family once again, and we owe you even more." Lin Xiao could feel that he was sincerely thanking her, so she waved her hand carelessly. She said, "Xiao Lu is so cute, how can I not care? I'll help as much as I can." Mother Lin and the others heard the conversation between Lin Feng and her, and turned to look at her gratefully. Lu Jun walked over with Tong Tong in her arms and asked Lin Xiao curiously, "Do you know what superpower Xiaolu awakened?" Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "I don't know, she'll only know when she wakes up." Lu Jun continued to look at Lin Xiaolu curiously on the bed. At this time Tong Tong, who was in her arms, also said curiously, "Mom, why is Sister Xiaolu asleep? Doesn't she get up to play?" Lu Jun turned to him and said with a smile, "Sister Xiaolu is sick, and she's very tired now, so she needs to rest." Tong Tong nodded with an understanding look on his face. Oh, then Lin Xiao could feel the thoughts in his mind. It turned out that Xiaolu was sick. What was sick? So she needed to rest when she was sick? Why did she need to rest? She looked at Tong Tong with a funny look, then turned to look at the pot of soup. She walked over to open the lid. Although it was covered, it was still a little cold. Lin Xiao turned to Lin Wenwen and said, "Lin Wen, you and Long Qingying go heat up the soup. When Xiaolu wakes up, let her drink some. Also, it's dinner time now. Don't waste the meal time." Oh. Lin Wenwen waited for her to finish speaking, and then said blankly. Lin Xiao then turned and walked out of the room, followed by Lu Jun and Xia Dong. After the figure disappeared, Lin Wenwen suddenly felt a little strange. She didn't know why, but when Lin Xiao said those words to her, for a moment she thought that the person talking to her was her elder sister. Familiar tone, familiar words. Lin Wenwen tilted her head in confusion, then thought about it as she carried the pot out with Long Qingying. Lu Jun, who returned to their room, asked Lin Xiao, who had just sat on the sofa, "Hey, didn't you say that Xiao Man didn't have enough energy? Why didn't she use energy to suppress Xiaolu's awakening?" Lin Xiao shook her head and said thoughtfully, "No, Xiao Man used up the last bit of energy. She has now advanced to the sleep stage, and she can only wait until she has stored enough energy before she wakes up. The last message that Xiao Man sent to her was to tell her about this. She spent 5 to 6 hours sorting out and filtering the energy in Lin Xiaolu's body. How could she not use Xiao Man's own energy? Moreover, Xiao Man had already used up the last bit of her energy to solve Lin Xiaolu's situation." Chapter 248. Lu Jun nodded. "Oh, so that's how it is. Then we'll have to wait for Lily to come back with the corpse cores to wake up Man. Right, you said Deputy Leader Yuan has been gone for a few days. When will he be back?" Lin Xiao glanced at Xia Dong and said, "Yuan Tianqing went to Haiqing base. The person he was looking for was Wu Chengyue. But Wu Chengyue isn't in the base. So, if the person he wants to work with isn't there, he'll find another person to work with. Xia Dong, do you think Yuan Tianqing will choose Yang Chao or Zhou Shihui?" She took out the writing board and handed it to Xia Dong. Xia Dong took the writing board and wrote, "Yang Chao doesn't want to work with anyone outside of the base. I think Zhou Shihui is more likely, but Zhou Shihui is a workaholic. His mind is on how to strengthen the base. He'll push this kind of diplomatic work to his 2 deputy leaders." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "So, even if Wu Chengyue goes back to the base, he won't give too many people. Therefore, Yuan Tianqing would use food to recruit some technicians from the base. But whether they're willing to come or not is another matter." Lu Jun sat on the bed with Tong Tong and looked at Lin Xiao thoughtfully. "So you're saying Deputy Leader Yuan will need a long time?" Lin Xiao nodded. So they had to wait and wait. Wait for Cho Lily, wait for Yuan Tianqing. 2 hours later, around 9 o'clock in the evening, Lin Feng and Cheng Wangxue brought Lin Xiaolu, who had woken up, to Lin Xiao's room. Lin Xiao cleaned up the room opposite Lu Jun's room and stayed there temporarily. It was adjacent to Xia Dong's room. Hearing the knock, Lin Xiao walked to the door and opened it. Lin Feng's family was standing in front of her door. "HM? Xiaolu is awake? Come in." Lin Xiao first looked at Lin Xiaolu, who was looking up at her, and then moved to the side to let them in. Lin Feng's face returned to his serious expression. He nodded at Lin Xiao and walked in. After Cheng Wangxue brought Xiaolu in, she pointed at Lin Xiao. "Come Xiaolu, thank you sister. When you fainted with a fever, it was this sister who saved you. You have to be grateful, okay?" Lin Xiaolu nodded obediently and looked at Lin Xiao with a cute face. She opened her mouth and said, "Thank you sister. Hey, don't call me sister. Call me auntie. I'm already so old, it's 2. Lin Xiao was speechless when she heard Cheng Wangshue's words, so she quickly stopped her. Although he couldn't call her aunt, he could call her auntie. If he called her big sister, the seniority would be messed up. If Lin Xiaolu called her sister, then Lin Feng, who was originally her brother, would suddenly become her uncle, and her mother would become her grandmother. TSK. Cheng Wangxue said in surprise, "How could it be? You don't look very old." Lin Xiao led the two to the sofa and waved at Cheng Wangxue. At the same time he said, No, I have to call her auntie. You can also call me auntie." Seeing that Lin Xiao was determined not to let her call her sister, Cheng Wangxue could only smile and say to her daughter, "All right then, you can call her auntie." But before she finished, Lin Feng suddenly interrupted and said, "Call her auntie. Auntie sounds nicer." Lin Xiao and Cheng Wangxue looked at Lin Feng with a strange expression. Although Lin Xiao thought it was more appropriate to call her auntie, she certainly wouldn't say it too deliberately. But why did Lin Feng's nice-sounding reason sound so awkward? Cheng Wangxue also looked at Lin Feng with a strange expression. Lin Xiao saw that the situation suddenly seemed a little awkward, so she immediately changed the topic and said, "Aya, you can call me anything. Come Xiaolu, you can choose what you want to call me." Lin Xiaolu originally wanted to call her auntie, but as soon as she opened her mouth, she was glared at by her father. She could only change it at the last minute and said, "Then auntie will do." Lin Xiao smiled and nodded. Then she asked her, "What is your special ability? Do you know how to use it?" Lin Xiaolu shook her head at her with a blank expression. "I don't know." Lin Feng said expressionlessly, "Not so fast. It may take another 2 or 3 days." Lin Xiao wasn't very clear about the awakening of human special abilities. Lu Tianyu's memory wasn't clear about this either. She had always been concerned about her body and appearance. Cheng Wangxue said, "Yes, the special ability can only be used 1 or 2 days after a person wakes up. So now we don't know what special ability Xiaolu has. But Xiaolu can successfully awaken her special ability. I really want to thank you for your help." Lin Xiao shook her head indifferently and said with a smile, "You don't have to be so polite." However, before Lin Xiao finished speaking, her face suddenly froze. She suddenly turned her face to look out of the window, and a certain light flashed in her dark eyes. Lin Feng and Cheng Wangxue were stunned by her expression and also looked out of the window. But it was dark outside, and there was no unusual movement. "What's wrong?" Cheng Wangxue couldn't help but ask curiously. Lin Xiao stood up and flashed to the side. She said casually, "Don't move, let me take a look." She flashed behind the wall next to the window, and then stretched out an eye to look out into the distance. On a tall building 1,000 meters away, which Lin Feng and his wife couldn't see clearly, a mirror-like reflection flashed from time to time. "You go back to the room and look after the others first." Suddenly, Lin Xiao's face was a little solemn as she threw a sentence to the two of them, and then disappeared. Only Lin Feng and Cheng Wangxue were left looking at each other with a dumbfounded expression. Lin Xiao turned invisible and jumped out of the window directly. Then, she used her hands and feet to climb from the outer wall to the roof of the building. She stood on the guardrail on the roof, raised her nose to the air in front of her, and sniffed a few times. Sure enough, there was a bunch of human smells coming from there. Lin Xiao was very familiar with the smell of one of them, because that was the guy she was going to kill next. After confirming which force the other party belonged to, Lin Xiao's body tilted and she jumped directly from the roof. When she fell to the 4th or 5th floor, she suddenly reached out and accurately clasped the guardrail of a balcony, and then flipped upside down into the balcony. Then, she jumped from the left side of the balcony to the right, and then to the balcony of another room and then jumped to the opposite room. Then she flipped over the guardrail of the balcony of that room, and then jumped to the balcony below. She arrived at the side room on the 4th floor. Lin Xiao entered the room from the balcony. This room was unoccupied. She quickly walked out of the door, and then walked to the door of Lu Jun's room. After knocking on the door, she opened the door and walked in. Lu Jun was coaxing Tong Tong to sleep. After seeing Lin Xiao come in and close the door, he asked softly, "What's wrong?" Chapter 249. Lu Jun's room was at the back of the hotel, so he couldn't see the front of the hotel, and the people below the hotel couldn't see the situation in the room. The side with the balcony that Lin Xiao just came down from was the front of the hotel, so the people she saw were more than 1,000 meters away from the hotel. She walked to the sofa and sat down. Oh right, you've recovered your memory. Then you should know what happened to Yang Jianhua, right? When I came to save Lin Feng and the others last time, I only heard their conversation. This Yang Jianhua, did he really do something to me? And I don't remember? Lu Jun was stunned, and then she looked at Tong Tong, who was already asleep. She gently stood up from the bed, walked to the sofa next to Lin Xiao and sat down. She looked at her son and said softly, I don't know what happened, but you probably know. As for whether he saved your life or not, you'll have to think about it yourself. Lin Xiao frowned, slightly lowered her head and pondered. She was no stranger to Yang Jianhua from Lin Feng, Long Qingying and Du Yuanxing. She knew what was going on, even though she was the victim. But she didn't understand it at all, and always felt that it was someone else's business. Lu Jun looked back at her strangely. Why did you suddenly ask about Yang Jianhua? What are you going to do to him? Lin Xiao looked up at her and said, he appeared. And now he is more than 1,000 meters away from the hotel. He's observing the situation on our side. Hearing this, Lu Jun's expression immediately sank. She said coldly, does he dare to come again? Wasn't he beaten by Lily last time? Lin Xiao held her chin and said, I guess he has been wandering around here, secretly observing. I wasn't here before and I didn't pay much attention when I came back. Maybe he saw that Lily had left this afternoon, so he was a little relaxed now. I think he should do something before Lily comes back, and we will know tomorrow morning. Lu Jun immediately frowned and asked seriously, then what should we do? Although there are a lot of ordinary zombies a few hundred meters away from the hotel, they can't stop superhumans above level 4 or 5. Not to mention Yang Jianhua, a level 6 superhuman who is about to break through to level 7. Lin Xiao said nonchalantly, don't worry about that. If we can't beat them, can't we just hide? With me around, there's no need to worry. As she spoke, she glanced at Lu Jun. Lu Jun nodded in realization. Oh right. I can enter your space. Oh, I forgot. However, Yang Jianhua was so obsessed with Lin Wenwen. It was disgusting. He's bisexual, right? Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, how would I know? I don't remember him. Lu Jun looked at her strangely and said, why did you only lose the memories of 5 years after the apocalypse? Haven't you forgotten what happened before the apocalypse? Lin Xiao said, it's already very strange for me to wake up from another person's body. Losing a few years of memory is nothing. And I thought I slept for 5 years. I didn't expect that I would lose my memory. Lu Jun nodded in agreement. That's true. I didn't expect you to wake up from another person's body. But does this body of yours have any relatives in Sea City Base? Lin Xiao nodded. There's one. I met him 2 days ago. Lu Jun said in surprise, oh? No way. Weren't you in downtown Hangzhou a few days ago? Did he go there too? Lin Xiao nodded and said, yes, their team was almost captured to be the food of a zombie king. I happened to pass by and saved them. She talked with Lu Jun for a while and told him to be careful. Then she turned around and went out of the room. She knocked on Xiadong's door to remind him to be vigilant and to pay attention to Lu Jun and his mother. Then she went to Lin Feng's room and saw Lin Wenwen and Mrs. Lin in Lin Feng's room. Even Lin Hao, who was usually absent, appeared in the corner. As soon as they saw Lin Xiao, they immediately looked at her as if they were waiting for her. Lin Feng looked at her and asked directly, what's the situation? Lin Xiao nodded and walked in to sit on an empty sofa. She replied, yes, it's Yang Jianhua. He's keeping an eye on us. Hearing that Lin Xiao was talking about Yang Jianhua, Lin Feng and the others' faces immediately became gloomy. Lin Wenwen immediately said, how dare he come back? Isn't he afraid of being chased away by Qiu Lily again? Lin Hao, who was about to cut the branch, lowered his hand. The originally smooth and sharp tip was immediately cut in half by him. Lin Xiao said expressionlessly, I don't know. Maybe he didn't leave or maybe he left and came back. And I think he must have noticed that Qiu Lily left in the afternoon. That's why he made such a big move tonight. I noticed it. Lin Feng said, if Tianqing was here, he could still be his opponent. But now that Tianqing and your Lily are not here, I guess we can't deal with him here. By the way, where did Qiu Lily go? Although she often disappears, it seems that she won't be away for too long. Lin Xiao said she went out to hunt. Maybe she won't be back in 2 days. Lin Wenwen asked curiously. She went hunting? Well, she's a level 6 zombie king and doesn't eat people. Then what did she go hunting for? Lin Feng glanced at Lin Wenwen and said, she can also go hunting zombies. Then he turned his head to look at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao nodded and said, you saw Junjun's situation. Lily wants to talk. But her level is too high and she needs too much energy. So she needs to find other energy to replace it. Mrs. Lin frowned and said, hey, what should we do now? Miss Lu, are you sure you really saw Yang Jianhua nearby? Why didn't we feel anything? Lin Hao, don't you feel anything? When she said the last sentence, Mrs. Lin turned her head to look at Lin Hao in the corner. Lin Hao put away the dagger in his hand and walked over with the twig that he had sharpened into 2 sharp points in his hand. No, I can only sense within 500 or 600 meters. I can only sense the zombies outside, but I don't feel anyone else. Where is that scumbag? Lin Hao said as he pulled a chair around everyone and sat down. Finally, he asked Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao said, he's on a building 1,300 meters away. He was just watching us with a special telescope. Everyone looked at Lin Xiao in surprise. Can your sensing range reach that far? Lin Xiao nodded to everyone lightly. It was more than 1,000 meters. If the other party didn't deliberately hide her sensing, she could even sense 2 or 3 kilometers away. And she could smell the smell in the air. Chapter 250. Mama Lin let out a long sigh, and her face darkened. When she thought of Yang Jianhua, she felt suffocated. Then what should we do? Lin Feng was never Yang Jianhua's match. Lin Xiao looked at her and comforted her with a smile. Don't you still have my space? If we can't beat them, we can always hide. I want to see what he's up to. Lin Wenwen said coldly with a gloomy face, I don't want to see him. Disgusting. Mother Lin also nodded and said, I don't want to see him either. Looking at him will blind my old eyes. Lin Xiao stood up and said, how about this? You guys stay in my space first. I'll see what he wants to do if he doesn't leave. When Lily comes back, she will deal with him. Don't worry. Lin Hao held the sharp branch in his hand and said viciously, I want to kill him. Although I can't do it now, as long as he's still alive, he'll die in my hands one day. Lin Feng looked at the others and said, Mom, take Wuxia, Xiaolu, and Wenwen into the space first. We will stay outside and observe the situation. If there is any danger, Miss Lu will bring us in. Mama Lin nodded. Cheng Wuxia pulled Lin Xiaolu into her arms, and then looked up at Lin Feng without saying a word. Lin Xiao walked over to Mama Lin and gently held her arm. The two disappeared in a flash. A few seconds later, Lin Xiao reappeared with Cheng Wuxia and Lin Xiaolu in the space. Lin Wenwen and the 2 soldiers without abilities, Wei Jingchen and Xiao Wenxing, were also brought in by Lin Xiao. Only the 2 brothers, Lin Feng and Lin Hao and Long Qingying, who were the stronger ones, were left outside. Having fewer people was actually more convenient. At the very least, they wouldn't be dragged down if they couldn't win. Lin Xiao returned to Lu Jun's room. Lu Jun had already held the sleeping Tong Tong in his arms, and was standing in the room waiting for her. Xiedong stood at the edge of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Seeing Lin Xiao come in, Lu Jun asked her, how many people will Yang Jianhua bring? Lin Xiao shook his head and said, I don't know, but the ability users around him are all around level 5. He has quite a number of people on his side. Lu Jun said, in fact, in addition to his own abilities, those cars are also very powerful. Weapons are very powerful. Previously, when he was attacked by Li Li, he didn't even use it. It seems like he's holding back. Lin Xiao nodded and put Lu Jun and Tong Tong into the space. Then he left the room with Xiedong. She walked to Lin Feng's room and said to them, you guys stay here and observe the situation. I'll go to Yang Jianhua's side and see what he wants to do. Wait for my news. As she spoke, she walked to a position opposite the door and turned invisible from the perspective of those outside the window. Then she quietly jumped out of the open window. The remaining 4 people found a place to sit in the room. Lin Feng looked at Xiedong and asked, may I ask a question? Xiedong looked at him, and after confirming that he was the one asking the question, he nodded in confusion. Lin Feng asked, maybe this question is a little impolite, please don't mind it. We've never heard you speak. May I ask if you've lost your voice? Xiaodong nodded straightforwardly and admitted it. Lin Feng said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. However, you and Lu Tianyu are both from Sea City Base. Why are you with her? Aren't you afraid of her?" He meant to ask why Xiaodong was not afraid of Lin Xiao's identity as a zombie, and still had the guts to follow her. Xiaodong took out a notebook from the bag buckled on his waist and wrote on it, "She's not a bad zombie. If she wanted to harm me, she didn't need to save me." "She saved you?" Lin Feng said with a little surprise, then glanced at Long Qingying next to him. He continued, "She likes to save people." Likes to save people? Xiaodong thought about it. It seemed that the people Lin Xiao saved included himself, Tong Tong and his mother, and Lu Tianyi. And the little princess, these people had nothing to do with her. And the two people like Long Qingying and Du Yuanxing had nothing to do with her. Thinking about it, Lin Xiao did like to save people. But she was a soldier like him, and the duty of a soldier was to serve the people. Saving people was something she should do. However, in this post-apocalyptic world, if he were to save everyone, he might end up saving some ingrates. In order to survive, many moral values were abandoned after the apocalypse. That was why there were robbers who ate people. In the team there was a betrayal today, and there would be a civil war tomorrow. Even if she was a soldier in the past, the style of a soldier was slowly worn away. The weak were prey to the strong, and the strong were respected. Lin Feng continued, "Was she such a person in the past?" This question made Xiaodong dazed for a moment, and he looked at Lin Feng in confusion. Then he shook his head. At this point, Lin Feng stopped asking and turned to look out of the window. Lin Hao then asked, "Did she really find that scum? Didn't she see wrongly?" He didn't feel anything at all, and he didn't quite believe Lin Xiao's words. Lin Feng looked at him and said seriously, "Although I'm not sure, it's not wrong to believe her for now. Even if there's a slight possibility, we have to be careful and not be careless." Lin Hao silently looked out of the window, and he couldn't see anything in the dark. At this time Lin Xiao was silently leaping on the roof. She was originally a transparent figure, and in the dark, no one or creature could detect her movements. It only took Lin Xiao a few blinks to cross the distance of 1,300 meters. She squatted on top of a street lamp and looked at the last floor of the 10-story building a dozen meters away. This was a residential area, and there were 7 or 8 buildings in the area, each of which was 12 or 13 stories high. Yang Jianhua and the others were on top of a building in the middle, although the building was built in the middle. But the position where Yang Jianhua and the others were at, they could see the direction of the hotel where Lin Feng and the others were. Lin Xiao raised her head slightly and looked up at the highest floor of the building, where Yang Jianhua and the others were. She looked down and found that she didn't see the other party's motorcade. Instead, she saw an underground parking lot, and they must have driven the cars down to hide. Lin Xiao sensed that aside from Yang Jianhua, there were a few level 5s and many level 3s on the roof, and they should be his subordinates. These people were gathered together in one room. Lin Xiao jumped down from the top of the street lamp, and then sneaked into the community. She didn't immediately go upstairs where Yang Jianhua was, but went to the underground parking lot. It was dark inside, but Lin Xiao could still see everything clearly with her eyesight. She walked down and looked to both sides, and sure enough, she saw Yang Jianhua's heavily armed cars parked by the wall. She cracked her knuckles and then walked towards the cars. Chapter 251. A few minutes later, Lin Xiao walked out quietly. Yang Jianhua's cars were nowhere to be seen, leaving only a few unconscious soldiers on the ground. In order to prevent being detected by Yang Jianhua, she hid her breath to the extreme. Therefore, the surrounding ordinary zombies didn't notice her. Instead, they slowly moved towards her after smelling the smell of the unconscious soldiers. Lin Xiao walked out of the parking lot and followed the smell to find the building where Yang Jianhua was. She quickly climbed up the air conditioner outside the building. Her movements were agile and nimble. Soon, she easily reached the top floor and went in through a window in the corridor. She walked along the wall of the corridor and looked out at a corner. She saw 4 or 5 soldiers standing guard in front of a door. Lin Xiao turned her head and looked in the direction of the stairs. There were indeed people guarding there. She moved over like a ghost that no one could see, bypassing the soldiers and stood in front of the door. She looked at the closed door in front of her. Although she was like a ghost that no one could see, She couldn't walk through the door like a ghost. Lin Xiao crossed her arms and turned her head to look at the soldiers holding flashlights on both sides. Then she put her ear on the door and listened to the movements inside. But there was no sound inside. There were a lot of breathing sounds. There were obviously a lot of people inside, but why was no one talking? Lin Xiao crossed her arms and turned her head to look at the soldiers standing on both sides of the door. She looked left and right. Suddenly, she let go of her hands and slapped the faces of the two soldiers on both sides with a pia sound. Then she dodged and hid in the empty space on the other side. Huh? Why did you hit me? The two soldiers who were slapped by Lin Xiao turned back with a confused face and looked at each other angrily. You were the one who hit me first. When did I hit you? Damn, did you see me hit you? If you didn't hit me, who else could it be when you stood in front of me? Are you fucking stupid? I stood in front of you so I hit you? Then you also stood in front of me so you hit me too? The two of them began to quarrel for no apparent reason. The people around them also looked at the two of them blankly. Hey, what was going on? What are you arguing about? Be careful that the leader inside will come out and deal with you. Another person said while holding a rifle. The two people who were slapped by Lin Xiao pointed at each other at the same time and said, Someone slapped me just now. It must be him. Wait a minute. Don't you think it's strange? That person looked at the two of them in confusion. What? Both of you seem to have been slapped in the face at the same time, right? And they didn't even see the other party make a move, did they? Why do I feel like both of you were hit by the same person at the same time? What does that mean? Yeah, there's no one else here besides us, right? From where you guys are standing, it's impossible for you to hit us without us seeing it, right? Now that you mention it, it seems to be true. But, could it be that we have an extra person here? Hey, don't talk nonsense. Why does it feel like you're telling a ghost story? It's so scary. Someone at the side said in fear. Everyone else. Lin Xiao laughed as he looked at the timid man. What kind of society was this? If there were ghosts, then wouldn't all zombies be ghosts? Would they be afraid of ghosts? Alright, I seem to be that ghost, ha ha ha. Thinking about it, Lin Xiao gently moved behind one of the people, then bent his fingers at the back of his head and used his knuckles to hit the back of his head twice. Ow! The person cried out in alarm. The others immediately turned their gazes and stared at him. Why are you suddenly screaming? Someone hit the back of my head. As soon as he finished speaking, the others immediately shone their flashlights behind him. However, there was nothing. The others silently looked back at him. That person looked at the others in fear and couldn't help but say, It can't be really a ghost, right? The others silently looked at him for a few seconds before saying, You weren't lying to us just now? That person immediately got angry and said unhappily, Fuck. Why would I lie to you guys for no reason? Weren't the two of you beaten up just now? He looked at the two people who were slapped by Lin Xiao. The two people nodded at the same time. They were indeed beaten up. However, they all thought that it was done by one of their own. The few people were silent. Suddenly they reacted at the same time. They turned around and shone their flashlights left and right, up and down. He scanned the surroundings several times but didn't see anything. Then the expressions of these people were all nervous. They leaned against each other with their backs to the door. Gotcha! Suddenly the door behind them opened. The few of them were startled and immediately turned their heads to look back. A man stood behind the door with a flashlight. He shone it at them and asked with a puzzled expression, What are you doing? Captain. The few people opened their mouths and called out to him. Then they looked at each other a few times and didn't speak. What should they say? Should they tell the captain that there seemed to be a ghost here just now? Maybe their captain would just hit them with his flashlight. Seeing their hesitant behavior, the captain opened the door and walked out in confusion. The few people outside immediately returned to their positions, straightened their backs and looked forward. The captain looked at them curiously as he walked out and stood in the corridor. Then he looked left and right but didn't see anything unusual. Why are you so suspicious? What are you doing? He looked at the few people standing on the other side of the stairs. They were also looking at this side with a puzzled expression. The captain shouted to them, What's the situation? The few people over there shook their heads, then spread their hands and pointed to the few people next to the captain. They said, Ask them. The captain turned around and looked at them with a puzzled expression. What were you doing just now? The few people shook their heads and replied at the same time. Nothing. The captain looked at them strangely, then turned around and walked back into the house, closing the door. But he didn't know that after he opened the door just now, a transparent figure had quietly bypassed the others and then flashed in. After watching the captain go in and close the door, they looked at each other. Then they turned their heads and looked around again as if they were looking for something. The few people on the other side of the stairs looked at their strange behavior and said in confusion, "What are they doing over there? They have been acting weird since just now. Seems that they are looking for something. I don't know, but someone seemed to be shouting just now. Sounds like someone was hit somewhere." "Well, I heard it too. He's so crazy, a little bit." Chapter 252. Lin Xiao, who dashed into the room, couldn't help being stunned when she saw the situation in the living room. There were many people in the room, but they were not from the same force. Yang Jianhua was not in the living room, because he couldn't see the hotel where Lin Feng and others were. He was in one of the bedrooms. Lin Xiao turned to look at the bedroom where Yang Jianhua was, and moved a few steps to another place. Then she saw Yang Jianhua standing in front of the window. He was holding a telescope and observing carefully outside the window. She withdrew her gaze and looked at the two groups of people in the living room. On one side were the people brought by Yang Jianhua, and on the other side were several men who were tied up and sitting on the ground without saying a word. 5 people were tied up and sitting in the corner with their backs against the wall. They were guarded by 7 or 8 soldiers with guns. These 5 people all had their heads down, so Lin Xiao couldn't see their faces. But Lin Xiao felt that their smell was a little familiar. She had a feeling that she had seen them somewhere before. She couldn't smell them clearly when she was outside just now, and they were mixed with a bunch of people. Now that she came up, she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. But since they were tied up, they were Yang Jianhua's captives. Yang Jianhua's enemies were on her side. So no matter who these 5 people were, she just needed to save them first. But there were 5 people and she could only take 2 people in at a time. Then she would have to save them 3 times. The guards might not be able to react in time for the first time, but they must have reacted in time for the second time. So the last one might be in danger of being killed directly. Lin Xiao stealthily avoided the other people in the room, and slowly walked to the front of those people. On the one hand, he wondered if he had met these people before, and on the other hand, he was thinking about how to throw all of them into the space in the same amount of time. Now she found that her space couldn't take in all the people at once. It was really a headache for her. Lin Xiao stood in front of the 5 people in a transparent body, holding her chin and looking left and right while thinking. Hey, when Junjun was holding Tong Tong, she could take 2 people in at once. She could suck 2 people in at once. If the 5 of them were to hold hands, would she be able to suck all of them in at once? Or should she tie them together with a rope? Thinking of this, Lin Xiao suddenly approached them and peeked behind them. To his surprise, he discovered that the ropes tied to the hands of these people were connected, and they were all tied together like a string. Lin Xiao smiled. Whatever I think of really comes true. Without thinking further, Lin Xiao pressed down on the 2 people in the middle and collected them. The 5 people who were originally leaning against the wall, sitting quietly on the ground, suddenly turned around. Suddenly, he disappeared in front of his eyes. The 7 or 8 people who were staring at them froze at the same time. Then, he couldn't help but raise a hand to rub his eyes and look again. No, Captain. Suddenly a trembling voice shouted out. What for? The person who answered was a level 5 arcanist. When he heard the shout, he subconsciously turned his head to look at the person who called him. Captain. Not good. Yes, Captain. Come and take a look. The others immediately followed suit, their voices trembling with disbelief. Hearing the commotion, the others immediately looked over. As a result, the captains immediately saw the problem. A few people rushed over fiercely. The captain who responded to them just now grabbed the people on his left and right one by one. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the empty corner of the wall in disbelief. Where are they? Where are they? He shouted angrily. The soldiers on both sides who were grabbed by him also panicked and replied. We don't know, they suddenly disappeared. Everyone present was silent for a moment, Then they stared at the place where the 5 people disappeared. The captain who went out to check just now had a sullen face and said, "Did someone sneak in?" Everyone looked at him blankly. Someone sneaked in? How? Even if there was no electricity in the room, they still had lighting equipment. There were a few storage radiant tubes in the room, which were as bright as the lights in a normal person's home. If someone had sneaked in, how could they not have seen it if they weren't blind? The captain looked at everyone and said, "I mean, Arcanus. There may be invisibility or spatial type." At this time, Yang Jianhua had already walked out of the bedroom and handed the binoculars to the assistant next to him. He looked at the group of people here and said, "What's the noise? What happened?" Everyone immediately quietened down and moved away from their positions. The empty corner of the wall was exposed. Yang Jianhua's originally cold face became even colder. He asked faintly, "Where are they?" "Report they're gone." The captain who was in charge of watching the people immediately stood up. Yang Jianhua didn't look at him, but maintained the posture of looking at the corner of the wall and said coldly, "What do you mean by they're gone? I told you to watch them and you guys can't see them?" On the other side, the people who were leaning against the wall suddenly fell back. Then when they immediately reacted, they saw that the scene in front of them had changed. "Fuck, what the hell is this place?" Li Zheng looked up and found that they were no longer in the previous house. Looking at the people next to him, they were also looking around in confusion. "Hey, over there, it seems to be Madam and Miss Wenwen. And Miss Xiaolu. Is that the sister-in-law?" Looking around, they saw Lin Wenwen and the others sitting on the sofa on the other side. Lin Wenwen, Mrs. Lin, and Chang Wangxue also stood up from the sofa and looked at the 5 men who were suddenly thrown into the grass by Lin Qiao in confusion. When they came over, they were immediately surprised. "Hey, isn't that Li Zheng and Feng Mingyu?" "Yes, and Lei Yao Feichong Lin and..." "Who is that?" Seeing Mrs. Lin and Lin Wenwen getting closer and closer, they were sure that they were not mistaken. Li Zheng and the others were all excited. "Madam, sister-in-law. Finally I see you. And Miss Wenwen and Miss Lu are also here. That's great. You're all fine." "That's great." The 5 people all got up from the ground excitedly. For a moment, they didn't care about the surrounding environment. Their attention was all on Mrs. Lin and the others who were walking towards them. Li Zheng and the others were actually Lin Qiao's more capable subordinates. Therefore, they were familiar with Lin Qiao's relatives, so Lin Wenwen and the others all knew Li Zheng and the others. Mrs. Lin and the others came closer and found that Li Zheng and the others were all tied up. "Hey, what's wrong with you? Why are you all tied up? Come on, Wenwen, Wangxue, untie them." Mrs. Lin says in surprise. She asks Lin Wenwen and Chang Wangxue to untie the ropes for them. Chapter 253. Lin Wenwen and Chang Wangxue immediately walked over and untied the ropes for them. Only then did they see Lin Qiao standing behind them. "What? Miss Lu, where did you bring them in?" At this time, Lin Qiao thought that he had actually brought all 5 of them in together. It seemed that he had really strung them together with a rope. Or did she just need to tie them together? Then if they didn't tie them with ropes, could they just grab each other? Hearing Lin Wenwen suddenly talking to someone behind them, Li Zheng and the others suddenly turned around. At a glance, they saw a bald man in a camouflage military uniform standing there, with one hand on his chest and the other supporting his chin. He was looking at them with shining eyes. Seeing that pair of eyes, Li Zheng and the others suddenly felt a chill. Subconsciously, they took 2 steps back, opened their eyes wide and were on guard. Needless to say, that was a pair of eyes of a high-level zombie. Moreover, their hands and feet were tied and their fighting power was 0. Lin Qiao didn't come back to her senses until Lin Wenwen called her. Looking at the reactions of Li Zheng and the others, she said discontentedly, "What are you staring at? I am saving you now. You don't have to look like you want to kill me." Hearing her words, Li Zheng and the others were stunned. Subconsciously, they thought that they might have recognized the wrong person. Maybe this bald man wasn't a zombie? Otherwise, how could he talk? But staring at that pair of eyes, Li Zheng and the others began to doubt themselves again. Are you a human?" As the captain, Li Zheng was still very calm. Seeing the reactions of Mrs. Lin and Lin Wenwen, it seemed that they were not afraid of this bald man. He calmed down a little and asked, Before Lin Xiao answered, Mrs. Lin, who was helping them untie the ropes, answered, "Oh, she is not a human. She is a zombie." But as soon as Mrs. Lin finished speaking, Li Jing and the others all turned to look at her. They had an expression of, "I must have heard it wrong" on their faces. They didn't know whether to doubt themselves or Mrs. Lin. "Wait a minute. What did you say she is?" Seeing their expressions, Lin Wenwen suddenly curled his lips in amusement. She said with a smile, "You heard it right. This bald girl is not a human. As you can see, she is a zombie that can talk. Isn't it amazing?" Cheng Wangxue stood to the side with Lin Xiaolu. She didn't help untie the rope because Wei Jingchen and Xiao Wenqing were there to help. Soon Li Zheng and the others untied the ropes. Li Zheng pulled away from Lin Xiao while rubbing his hands, which were tied up and unable to move. He said to Lin Wenwen with a confused expression, "Miss Wenwen, are you kidding me?" Lin Xiao stood there with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He looked at them and said, "What? If you don't believe me, then why are you distancing yourself from me?" Feng Mingyu, who had been dumbfounded, suddenly pulled Xiao Wenqing and said, "Brother Xiao, is what she said true?" Xiao Wenqing saw that these people's expressions were the same as their reactions back then, and he couldn't stop laughing in his heart. He had the mentality of making others cry even if he cried himself. He replied with a smile, "Mingyu, look at her eyes. They're not fake. No metahuman's eyes would look like that, only zombies' eyes would look like that." Feng Mingyu was even more confused. "Then why are you with zombies? She's not going to eat us, is she? Zombies that can talk, whoa, so scary." As he spoke, he hid behind Xiao Wenqing with a long face. Xiao Wenqing turned around, patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "What are you afraid of? Have you seen us nervous? Besides, she just said that she's saving you." "Mrs. Lin suddenly asked, "By the way, what's wrong with you guys? How did you get tied up and where were you brought in?" Even at night, Lin Xiao's space has its own light. Therefore, there was some dim light inside so people could see clearly the environment inside. Hearing Mrs. Lin's question, Li Zheng notices that there isn't a single light bulb in the room. There are no lights either. "Mrs. Lin, what is this place? It was night just now. How come it's morning here?" He thought for a while and suddenly changed the topic. "Is this a space? The space of a metahuman?" Mrs. Lin nodded with a smile, "You're right. This is her space." Mrs. Lin pointed at Lin Xiao. The others all opened their mouths in surprise. "What a big space." Lin Xiao looked at them with a smile. "What? Are you not afraid of me now?" Although Li Zheng and the others were still on guard against Lin Xiao, they were not afraid of her now. Maybe it was because Mrs. Lin and Lin Wenwen looked so calm and Lin Xiao looked so kind. Lei Yao said, "You are not hostile to us, and you don't want to attack us." Looking at these men, Lin Xiao felt that they were familiar. She couldn't help but ask, "Have I seen you before? Your smell is so familiar." Hearing Lin Xiao's last sentence, Li Zheng and the others thought of dogs at the same time. "We don't know you. Did you get the wrong person?" Feng Mingyu was still hiding behind Xiao Wenqing and shouted at Lin Xiao. He had the urge to doubt his life now. There was a zombie in front of them, a big one. Not only could it talk, his body was also clean and he was wearing normal clothes just like them. And it saved them. And it was such a big space. There were other people in the space. Coincidentally, these people were the ones they had been looking for earlier. It must be an illusion. It was an illusion. Thinking about it, Feng Mingyu suddenly closed his eyes and murmured, "It's an illusion. It must be. I am seeing an illusion. It's not real." Xiao Wenqing was amused by his reaction and couldn't help but slap the back of Feng Mingyu's head. "Are you an idiot or what? Open your eyes and see if it's an illusion. Why don't I give it a try to see if it's fake or not?" Feng Mingyu immediately shook his head and refused. No, I believe it's real. I believe it." Although he had supernatural abilities, he was always beaten by Xiao Wenqing in terms of physical skills. Lin Xiao said, "Are you done catching up? If you are, go sit over there." Then she pointed to the sofa where Mrs. Lin and the others were sitting. Then she said to Lin Wenwen, "Get some water from the lake for them to drink. Remember to give each of them 3 cups of water. Also, the food here is not poisonous. Give it to them. I'll go out and see what's going on." After being called by her, Lin Wenwen nodded subconsciously. "Oh, Lin Xiao said and walked out of the space, leaving Li Zheng and the others thinking I must be dreaming. Lin Xiao talked with Mrs. Lin and the others. Chapter 254. As soon as Lin Xiao leaves, Li Zheng and the others relax. Lin Luoran still asks Mrs. Lin and others with a look of disbelief. Is she really a zombie? That's impossible. Zombies can talk, and her IQ doesn't seem to be any lower than ours. If zombies evolve to be like her in the future, wouldn't that be terrible? Mrs. Lin says, she is different from normal zombies. She doesn't eat people and she won't hurt anyone. Although there are a lot of people, Cho Lily has 2 or 3 sofas here which are enough for everyone to sit on. It's just that the seats are a bit wide. Cheng Wangxue asked, by the way, how did she save you? And what's with the rope on your body? Li Zheng said, we met Yang Jianhua yesterday, and then we were caught by him without saying anything. Only Lin Yu escaped. Mrs. Lin's eyes widen in surprise and she asks, how did you meet him? Also, why are there only so few of you? Are you saying that only Lin Yu escaped? Li Zheng's face darkens and he nods to Mrs. Lin. He lowers his eyes and says, we came here from the base more than a month ago, and we were the only ones left on the way to Haiqing base. Later, when we were in Sea City, we heard that our base had been destroyed and you guys had escaped. Therefore, I followed the team sent by Sea City base's leader Purple Thunder to look for you. At this moment, Lei Yao interjected, I didn't expect to run into Yang Jianhua after searching for half a month. That's the result. Lin Wenwen finds 5 cups and pours water for them. She points to the strange man among them and asks, is he a friend from Haiqing base? The man nods to her politely, hello, my name is Huang Ming. He points to a row of chariots in front of the woods that no one has been paying attention to. He asks in a weak voice, did she take in the chariot? Mrs. Lin and the others turn around and say carelessly, oh, they were thrown in here. This space belongs to her. Apart from her, who else can take it in? Outside, Lin Xiao saw Yang Jianhua sitting on the sofa with his head lowered. His elbows were on his knees and his fingers were crossed in front of his forehead. Very good. There are so many of us, but they managed to sneak in and rescue us all. You guys are really amazing. Although the people in the room couldn't see his face, they felt a chill in their hearts just by hearing his voice. Yes, not only was his heart cold, but his body was also cold. As the temperature in the room plummeted, everyone knew that their boss was about to explode. A layer of ice suddenly formed under Yang Jianhua's feet. Then, the ice quickly rushed towards the 7 or 8 soldiers who were originally guarding Li Zheng and the others. The soldiers panicked and wanted to retreat, but they only took half a step back before a layer of ice froze them from their feet to their heads. In the blink of an eye, there were 7 or 8 ice sculptures standing upright in the room. Everyone else was staring at the ice sculptures, not daring to breathe too loudly. They didn't even dare to move. Many people were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Lin Xiao stood in the corner where there was no one. The temperature at night was 10 degrees lower than during the day, and it was very cool. But standing in the room now, it was a little too cool. Yang Jianhua let go of his hand and said, but the other party is also very powerful. Even I didn't notice it. He stood up and slowly walked towards the ice sculptures. But you guys can't even guard people. What's the use of you guys? As he said that, he raised his hand and knocked on the ice sculpture closest to him. The ice sculpture that he knocked on made a few kacha-kacha, cracking sounds in the next second. Then the sound became louder and louder. Kacha-walala, then, the human-shaped ice sculpture completely shattered and fell to the ground, turning into a pile of ice shards. But not a single drop of blood splashed out. Yang Jianhua's face didn't have much expression, but his eyes were especially cold. He walked towards the ice sculptures one by one, then knocked on them and patted them. When he walked back, there was a crashing sound behind him. Originally, I wanted to use them to provoke Lin Feng and the others so that they would reveal an opening when they panicked. But now you guys have ruined my good hand. The others just stared blankly at the piles of ice shards, but no one dared to say anything. Lin Xiao stood behind these people and could faintly sense some of their thoughts. Too cold-blooded. Why didn't I know Yang Jianhua's true colors before? Motherfucker. If it weren't for my family being controlled by you, I wouldn't have followed you out to chase after the commander. She was surprised to find that these people didn't follow Yang Jianhua willingly. He actually controlled someone else's family and used this method to subdue these soldiers? It was not only the soldiers without abilities who thought so, even the rank 5 ability users had the same thought. Motherfucker, why did the leader treat this kind of scum so well? Protecting him everywhere. He's clearly a scum. Bastard. What do you think we are? You kill us if you want to, just like dogs. Lin Xiao looked at Yang Jianhua and found that she really had no impression of this man. Since he had hurt her before, why didn't she feel anything for him at all? But according to everything that had happened, this man seemed to have harmed her for Lin Wenwen, and then saved her. Then, he used the favor of saving her life to get close to her. While thinking of ways to continue harassing Lin Wenwen, he found out that she was strong enough to build a base. He would wait for her to build a base before attacking her with that dragon or whatever it was. He directly snatched the base. He really killed 2 birds with 1 stone and reaped the fruits of others' labor. She looked at Yang Jianhua's handsome face, but with a cold expression. Even a good-looking face couldn't hide the sinister aura on his body. If he pinched his thumb and middle finger, he would probably be a demon. Lin Xiao silently thought, could she have been charmed by this Yang Jianhua's beauty back then? Yang Jianhua walked back, but he didn't sit on the sofa again. Instead, he walked towards the bedroom. His assistant immediately followed him in and handed him the binoculars. He took the binoculars and said as he put them in front of his eyes, "Forget it, let's just save them. Since we can't use these people to provoke them, we can only launch a surprise attack." After a few glances, he put down the binoculars. He turned and walked out of the bedroom saying, "Change our position and get ready to attack. Let's go now, night attack." With that said, he led the way out of the hall. Lin Xiao saw that he had started to move so decisively, and immediately moved to the side of a level 5 ability user's squad leader. Then, she reached out and grabbed him, and suddenly disappeared with him. Chapter 255. Lin Xiao followed that person and disappeared. In the next second, his claw directly stabbed into the captain's head, and then he forcefully twisted his wrist. The captain only felt that he was suddenly pulled while he was walking, and then his vision blurred. Before he could react, he felt a sharp pain in his head, and then he didn't know anything. He didn't know. He was just cursing those soldiers who turned into ice in his heart. They were all useless things, and caused his position in Yang Jianhua's heart to drop a lot. He thought that if Yang Jianhua didn't kill them, he would have killed them himself. It was because of this thought that Lin Xiao killed him first. This kind of person actually wanted to kill his subordinates, then in the future, he would definitely use his subordinates to block zombies. Because Lin Xiaolu was in the space, Lin Xiao chose the forest when he brought people in to kill. And his actions were clean, and there wasn't even a sound. After taking out the energy core from the skull, Lin Xiao carried the corpse and flashed out. Yang Jianhua, who was outside, didn't notice that there was suddenly a person missing, and suddenly heard a putong sound. He looked back and found that there was another corpse on the ground behind him. This was not killed by him. What happened? Yang Jianhua's face suddenly became gloomy. An icy aura emitted from his body, and the people around him couldn't help but take a step back. The others looked at him with a dumbfounded expression and replied, "Report?" He just disappeared for a few seconds, and then suddenly became like this. Yang Jianhua stared at the corpse lying on the ground, and saw that other than the head that was cut open, the rest of the body was intact. "Come out, you can kill a level 5 psychic in a few seconds without making a sound. Don't you dare to show your real body? Or are you afraid of me?" He raised his eyes and glanced at the people around him. He said in a cold voice, "I'm afraid that I will scare you if I come out." Lin Xiao stood behind him and said faintly, "Swish, swish, swish." Everyone instantly turned around, and all kinds of gun skills and abilities were aimed at Yang Jianhua's back. They saw an unfamiliar baldy wearing sunglasses in the middle of the night, and they didn't know when he had stood behind Yang Jianhua. Yang Jianhua didn't panic. He just calmly turned around. He saw that the person standing behind him was only half a meter away from him. However, he had sensed this person's aura the moment it appeared. Because he didn't feel any killing intent, he calmly turned his head. Of course, if this person attacked as soon as he appeared, He also had the ability to sense it in time, so it wasn't difficult for him to avoid it. The first thing Yang Jianhua saw when he turned around was not Lin Xiao's bald head. It was her chest. A bald woman with big breasts. Judging from the shape of her chest, she was at least a D. Her waist was very thin and her legs were long. She was about 1.7 meters tall. Further up on her slender neck, the skin was so white that it seemed to be emitting a faint white light. Her chin was exquisite, and her face was shaped like an oval. Even with sunglasses covering her eyes, he could tell that she was a very beautiful woman from her nose, lips, chin, and the shape of her face. Even if it was bald, it was round and cute. Lin Xiao looked at Yang Jianhua with a slightly disdainful gaze. She had a strong sense of what he was thinking. He was actually staring at her appearance and figure to calculate his score. As expected, he was a pervert. After sizing up Lin Xiao, Yang Jianhua suddenly smiled faintly. I thought an ugly person would come out to scare me. What? Do you think you can scare me with your bald head? Lin Xiao didn't say anything more to him. She lowered her head slightly and took off her sunglasses. Then she slowly raised her eyes and looked at him. Yang Jianhua was very curious about what her eyes looked like. However, when he saw a pair of eyes without any white, the entire eye socket was cold and dark. He was so shocked that he forgot to make a sound. After being stunned for 2 seconds, he suddenly took a few steps back. He pointed at Lin Xiao. You are not human. The moment Yang Jianhua stepped back, the other ability users and soldiers around him could clearly see Lin Xiao's pair of strange black eyes. Their reaction was the same as his, and they subconsciously took 2 steps back. Bang! Suddenly, someone overreacted and fiercely attacked Lin Xiao. At the same time, Lin Xiao raised her hand without turning her head. She grabbed the bullet in her hand and released her palm. Ding dash, the metal bullet fell on the tile floor and made a crisp sound. Lin Xiao didn't turn her head to look at the soldier who shot at her. Instead, a faint black gas came out of her palm. She went around the soldier. She looked at Yang Jianhua and said, You are right. Is this the place for me? After staying here for so long, my patience is also limited. I didn't plan to attack you, but you seem to be preparing to attack my prey. I can't tolerate this. Yang Jianhua still hadn't digested it. He widened his eyes and looked at Lin Xiao in shock. He asked in disbelief, You are really a zombie? He heard Lin Xiao's words very clearly. Territory prey. Does it mean that this area is the territory of this zombie that can only speak the human language? Then the prey was Lin Feng and the others? Because Yang Jianhua was preparing to attack Lin Feng and the others. The prey you are talking about. Are you talking about Lin Feng and the others? Lin Xiao nodded. She played with the sunglasses in her hand and wiped them with the corner of her clothes. She looked down at the sunglasses and said, What else? Is it you guys? I don't mind if you want to send yourself to my mouth, but I won't give up what I want to others. I have let you guys stay here for so long. That's enough respect. Yang Jianhua suddenly calmed down. This female zombie had such a high IQ and could talk. Moreover, it was able to come and go as it pleased, which meant that this zombie's level was at least above the Zombie King level. It seemed that she had entered the level of a level 2 king zombie. But the other party's attitude didn't seem to be hostile towards him. That meant that he still had a chance, so the other party didn't have a reason to attack them. Yang Jianhua swallowed and said, We haven't been here for long. It's only been 2 days. It hasn't been that long. And since Lin Feng and the others are your prey, we didn't know before. Now that we know, we won't fight with you. You can do whatever you want. We won't interfere. Facing a level 2 king zombie that might be a level 7 zombie, Yang Jianhua had to admit defeat. He didn't dare to be arrogant and think that he could beat a level 2 king zombie. He couldn't even beat a normal level 6 zombie king. However, he didn't know that he had been tricked by Lin Xiao. Chapter 256. Lin Xiao knew what he was thinking from his expression and eyes, and because he was very close to her. Because she was very close to him, she could sense his psychological reaction and knew that she was just talking nonsense. He completely believed. She said, Isn't 2 days long? How long do you think is long? You don't look like a good person. Are you enemies with my prey? Lin Xiao walked over as she spoke. She stretched out her nose and sniffed here and there. Then she showed a very intoxicated expression. It was really fragrant, the smell of living people. Seeing Lin Xiao's expression, Yang Jianhua and the others all knew what she meant. She was treating them as food. No one saw the wisp of black gas that Lin Xiao released just now. When no one was paying attention, it drilled into the soldier's ear. Then his body froze. The light in his eyes dimmed and his pupils dilated. Plop! Suddenly there was a sound. Everyone immediately looked towards the source of the sound. There was another corpse on the ground, and this corpse's head was disappearing. The others looked at each other. Finally, they all looked at Lin Xiao carefully. Wasn't this the person who fired the gun just now? Lin Xiao nodded generously and said, "Oh, this person just attacked me. Since he attacked me, of course I have to eat him." As she spoke, she stared at their eyes one by one. She saw that these people really lowered their heads and carefully avoided her gaze. Or they even moved a few steps guiltily, afraid that her gaze would be fixed on them. She looked at Yang Jianhua's eyes and said to him, "What? You haven't answered my question. Do you think I'm very free and have time to chat with you?" Yang Jianhua's whole body went cold under her stare. Only then did he come back to his senses. He said, "They're not enemies. It's just that they betrayed our base and escaped. In order to prevent them from leaking some secrets, I want to catch them all back or kill them." Lin Xiao sneered at him and said, "Do you think I'm stupid and don't know the situation outside? Over there is a group of people who escaped from Hades' base in the south. There might be many casualties on the way. And Hades' base, I know. It was breached by another base not long ago. If it's not destroyed now, then it must have changed owners." Hearing Lin Xiao's words, a thin layer of sweat immediately appeared on Yang Jianhua's forehead. He chuckled and said, I didn't expect you to care about this." "Yes, they escaped from the Netherworld King's base." Lin Xiao said, "So what if they ran away? These are just the remnants of the defeated army. All right, you can go now. Do you need a ride?" As she said the last sentence, she glanced at the door. Next, he casually moved his finger and a strand of black energy surged out. He leapt towards a few soldiers who were more loyal to Yang Jianhua. Although those people saw the black smoke that Lin Xiao released, they did not have the time to react. The thin wisps of black gas rushed towards them, and then disappeared in a flash. Then he felt a sharp pain from his ears to his head. Soon these people fell to the ground before they could even cry out in pain. Seeing them fall to the ground, everyone realized that the person who fell just now only had 2 feet left. The other parts of his body were gone. "All right, we'll go now." Yang Jianhua immediately lifted his feet and walked out. The others protected him as he walked out. Lin Xiao stood in the same place and watched the few corpses on the ground slowly disappear. After Yang Jianhua walked out, she heaved a sigh of relief. Fuck, this pretentious act was a bit too big. However, she originally wanted to get some information from the other party, but the other party seemed to be very cunning. She knew that if she fought with Yang Jianhua, it would be difficult for her to deal with his ice alone. Lin Xiao looked at the scene in front of her with a gloomy expression. Her black fog had covered the piles of ice for a while, and she saw that the speed at which the ice was melting was very slow. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly felt a sudden chill on her back. She quickly turned around and nimbly flipped to the side of the wall. Then in midair, she kicked the wall and did a somersault, leaping towards the window of the hall. When she turned around, she saw that the door and the surroundings where Yang Jianhua and the others went out were covered with a thick layer of ice. A cold and gloomy fog was emitted from the surface of the ice. "I was almost fooled by you. You are not a zombie at all." Yang Jianhua's cold voice came from the door, and then saw him coming back from behind the door. At this time, a pair of charming eyes were filled with coldness as they stared at Lin Xiao, who was by the window. Lin Xiao chuckled. "Sigh, I failed to show off." She jumped down from the window, looked at Yang Jianhua and said, "Since you have already seen through it, why are you still acting with me? You really have nothing better to do." "I just wanted to see what your purpose is," said Yang Jianhua with a faint smile. "I didn't expect that you just want to drive me away. If they were really zombies, how could they let us go so easily?" As he spoke, Yang Jianhua suddenly raised his hand and waved at Lin Xiao. A pile of ice arrows instantly condensed in the air and shot towards Lin Xiao in a densely packed manner. It was extremely fast and covered a large area. Lin Xiao flipped out of the window and leaped onto the windowsill to reach the rooftop. The ice arrows that shot out of the window fell to the ground. Yang Jianhua's figure flashed and he also jumped out of the window. With a wave of his hand, he directly built an ice ladder from the window to the rooftop. He stepped on the ice ladder twice and jumped to the top of the building. It was pitch black on the rooftop. Lin Xiao stood at the corner of the building and said to Yang Jianhua, "Since you don't want to leave easily, then don't regret it." As she spoke, Lin Xiao jumped into the air before Yang Jianhua's ice quickly froze her feet. Then suddenly she flashed and disappeared. Kacha kacha. The ground on the rooftop was largely frozen by Yang Jianhua's ice. If Lin Xiao hadn't jumped into the air, she would probably have been frozen. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly disappear, Yang Jianhua stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked around. Then he closed his eyes and carefully sensed. He found that Lin Xiao's breath was indeed gone. Just as he opened his eyes, he suddenly dodged to the side and casually threw out a large amount of ice energy at his original position. A figure flashed past his previous position, but left behind a large amount of black gas that was frozen in the air by Yang Jianhua's ice. Bang 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 kacha kacha. The ice that froze the gas fell to the ground and broke into pieces. Chapter 257. Lin Xiao, who was hiding in a corner, looked at Yang Jianhua and could not help but sigh. Her attack did not have any effect on Yang Jianhua, but his senses were very sharp. It seemed that she could only wait and see. Yang Jianhua stared at the black ice shards on his body, which were slowly melting. His ice was actually melted by this strange gas. It seemed that this gas was very corrosive. That metahuman with eyes as black as a zombie's, was he a poisonous gas-type metahuman? This type of metahuman was not easy to guard against. But it was not difficult to guard against them. Yang Jianhua glanced around and then smiled coldly. "Although I don't know who you are, it seems that you are with Lin Feng and the others. Since you are the vanguard, it means that you have discovered us. I think Lin Feng and the others will not be able to come out." Lin Xiao did not appear, but stood quietly at the side and looked at him. Yang Jianhua paused after saying that. He did not see Lin Xiao appear. He continued, "I know you are still here. Aren't you being held captive by that rank 6 metahuman? There are a large number of zombies surrounding 500 meters outside of your hotel. Even if you want to leave, you can't. And I see that your numbers have decreased. It seems that you have been eaten one by one." Huh. This person's brain was really big. He actually thought that way. Lin Xiao could not help but look at him with a smile. She knew that Yang Jianhua might have arrived 2 days ago. So after observing for the past 2 days, she noticed that Du Yuanxing, Yuan Tianxing, and the others were missing. Thinking about how he was attacked by Qiu Lily before, she actually thought that those people might have been eaten by Qiu Lily. Moreover, the surrounding zombies had blocked every entrance. Yang Jianhua actually thought that they were there to block Lin Feng and the others. To think that he could actually think of that. But from another perspective, it was normal for people who did not know the inside story to think that way. Moreover, Qiu Lily often moved around on the roof. Her whereabouts were uncertain. Indeed, it was a bit like the owner of a cow or sheep. So this was what this person had been observing for the past 2 days. Lin Xiao squatted on the wall by the side of the building, while Yang Jianhua continued to talk to himself. "What, you don't dare to come out? I felt that you were here. You even dared to show yourself just now. What's going on now?" At this moment, a soldier covered in wounds suddenly staggered up from the stairs. Then, he went up to the captains who were standing at the top of the stairs and said a few words. Then the faces of these captains changed drastically. "Leader! Oh no, our chariots are gone." One of the team leaders immediately turned to Yang Jianhua and shouted. Yang Jianhua immediately turned his head to look at them, and a cold aura rushed towards them. He narrowed his eyes and slowly walked towards them with his long legs. "What did you say?" The people at the staircase immediately gave way to the soldier. The soldier's body was covered with wounds and was dripping with blood. However, these wounds were all caused by scratches or bites. He gasped weakly and said, "We were suddenly knocked out. When we woke up, we saw the cars were gone. We were surrounded by zombies." When everyone heard this, they looked at the many wounds on his body and his pale face. Everyone knew that this soldier was hopeless. However, Yang Jianhua said, You were bitten by zombies. Then, before everyone could understand what he meant, they saw that the soldier was quickly frozen into an ice sculpture. Yang Jianhua looked back at the empty rooftop and said with a gloomy face, "So that's what you wanted?" Lin Xiao raised his eyebrows, then gently flipped out of the building and floated down. When they returned to the hotel, Lin Feng and the other three were waiting in the room. When they saw Lin Xiao return, they immediately stood up from their chairs. "How is it? Is it really Yang Jianhua?" Lin Xiao looked at them and said, "I think Yang Jianhua will be here soon. I'll take you into the space to hide. I'll let you meet some people." Then he walked forward and pulled Lin Feng and Lin Hao into the space. As soon as they entered, they saw a group of people sitting on the sofa and chatting enthusiastically. Lin Xiao left the two people behind and flashed out again. Then, he brought Long Qingying and Xie Dong in. When they came in, they saw Lin Feng and Li Zheng staring at each other. "Li Zheng, why are you here?" Looking at Li Zheng, Feng Mingyu, Lei Yao and Fei Chonglin, Lin Feng couldn't believe his eyes. "Captain, we are relieved to see that you are all fine." Li Zheng and the others also stood up and looked at Lin Feng excitedly. Mrs. Lin laughs, "Didn't I tell you that we're all fine? But you are the only ones left in your team." Lin Xiao looked into the space but didn't see Lu Jun and Tong Tong. After a while, he found that they were hiding in the small space over there. Because they didn't come out, Mrs. Lin and Li Zheng didn't know that there were people in the small space over there. They didn't notice that there was a small space over there. Lin Feng asked in shock, "Mom, why are they here?" Mrs. Lin smiled and said, "Why are you asking me? Shouldn't you be asking Miss Lu?" Lin Feng finally realized what was going on and wanted to ask Lin Xiao. However, he looked around but didn't see anyone. He only saw Long Qingying and Xie Dong walking to the lake. "What? Where did she go?" Li Zheng said, "Captain, please sit down first. I can explain it to you." He pointed to Huang Ming and said, "This is Captain Huang Ming under Deputy Leader Xiao of High City Base." Lin Feng didn't expect that there were people from High City Base here. He looked at Huang Ming in surprise. Huang Ming smiled and waved his hand. He said with some embarrassment, "Oh no, just call me Huang Ming. Don't call me Captain." Lin Feng nodded and his face was not so serious. He said with a faint smile, "You are also a level 5 paranormal like Li Zheng. It's normal for you to be a captain in the base. Don't be modest." They all sat down on the sofa and stood up. Li Zheng said, "We met Yang Jianhua 2 days ago and were subdued by him without any explanation. Then he was brought here. He told us a lot about the base and the leader proudly." Li Zheng and Feng Mingyu didn't look so good when he said this. Lin Feng and the others could roughly guess what Yang Jianhua was talking about. Anyway, it wasn't what they wanted to hear. "We were tied up and followed them here. Just now, we were on the roof of a building in a community. We were all pressed against the wall and didn't know what happened. Suddenly we were pulled. When we came back to our senses, we were already here." Chapter 258. From what he said, Lin Feng also guessed what was going on. He thought about the bald female zombie's behavior. Well, she would steal people away secretly. It wasn't the first time. But this time he had to admit that it was a good steal. Mrs. Lin said, "Yes, when they were thrown in, they were tied up. We didn't know what was going on." Li Zheng said doubtfully, "But Miss Lu is really a zombie." At this time, Li Zheng said with some doubt, "But that Miss Lu is really a zombie. She doesn't know us. You don't know that we were caught by Yang Jianhua." Mrs. Lin said curiously, "Yes, I'm curious about that too." Mrs. Lin also said curiously, "Yes, I'm curious about that too." Lin Feng looked left and right again and asked, "Hey, where is she?" Lin Xiao had already sensed that they were looking for her, so she walked out of the pocket space. Lin Xiao had long sensed that they were looking for him, so he walked out of the small space. "Looking for me? Looking for me?" Everyone looked at her and saw that she was wearing a pair of sunglasses on her shiny bald head. If it weren't for her chest, it would be hard to tell her gender. Lin Feng turned his head and looked in that direction. Only then did he realize that there seemed to be a cave-like space there. His attention was immediately diverted. "Hey, is there another space over there?" Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Yes, is there a problem?" It was the first time she heard that there was a compartment in this space. Lin Feng shook his head, "No problem. Oh, we wanted to ask why you wanted to save Li Zheng and the others when you saw them. Did you know that they knew each other? Lin Xiao shook her head. I didn't know. I just thought that Yang Jianhua's enemy should be our friend. He should be a friend from our side, so in order to make things difficult for him, I'm sure he's from our side. Who knew that you knew each other? Lin Feng turned around and said to Li Zheng, did you know? Tianqing brought a few brothers to the high city base to find more people, and also to look for your team. Tianqing even brought a few brothers to the sea city base. On one hand, he was there to look for more manpower. On the other hand, he was looking for your team. Li Zheng said. Tianqing brought a few brothers to the high city base. So even if we didn't meet Yang Jianhua, the deputy leader wouldn't be able to find us. So even if we didn't meet Yang Jianhua, the deputy leader wouldn't be able to find us. Lin Feng and the others nodded and said, that's true. But why aren't you in the base? Why did you come out? Mrs. Lin says, oh, I'll help them. They came out to look for us, but they didn't know the route we took. Therefore, he took a detour to the neighboring city. They couldn't find us for more than half a month. I didn't expect to bump into Yang Jianhua's motorcade. Lin Feng sighed and said, then we can only wait for Tianqing to return. By the way, how many people are left in your team? As he spoke, Lin Feng looked at Li Zheng. Li Zheng lowered his head dejectedly and sighed as he replied, now, other than the four of us here, there is still Lin Yu. It was unknown if he had returned to Sea City, or if he was still surviving on his own outside. He wasn't there when we were discovered by Yang Jianhua. Later, he probably went into hiding, so he wasn't discovered by Yang Jianhua. Lin Feng thought about it and asked uncertainly, Lin Yu doesn't have any special abilities, right? I remember that only a few of you have abilities in your team. I didn't expect that there would only be a few of you left out of the 20 of you. Li Zheng said, yes, it's him. The others were sacrificed. We couldn't do anything about it. There were too many zombies along the way, and we even encountered a level 5 zombie leader. They gave up their lives to create a chance for us to escape. The more he spoke, the lower Li Zheng's voice became, and his eyes slowly lowered. Feng Mingyu and Lei Yao's expressions became as heavy as his. Seeing that the atmosphere didn't seem to be good, Lin Feng and the others looked at each other. He quickly changed the topic. Oh, right. I forgot to introduce you guys. Do you know who Miss Liu is? Li Zheng looked up and saw that Lin Feng was pointing at Lin Xiao, who was watching the scene. He nodded and said, yes, she is a zombie. Although I don't believe that she is really a zombie. Lin Xiao bared her teeth at him and said, do you want me to bite you? Li Zheng looked at the 4 protruding teeth in her mouth and said quietly, aren't you a zombie? At this time, Feng Mingyu asked, is there a difference between zombies and zombies? The others immediately looked at him and said, of course there is. Feng Mingyu asked with a confused face, what is it? The others said zombies, but they suddenly couldn't tell what the difference was. Yes, zombies have corpse poison. They will also become zombies after biting people. And zombies have virus. They will also become zombies after biting people. They seem to be almost the same. Are you stupid? Zombies are afraid of sunlight, but are zombies afraid of sunlight? Zombies eat human flesh and bones. Have you ever heard of zombies eating human flesh and bones? Oh no. Are you an idiot or what? Do zombies really exist? Have you seen one? Lin Xiao said speechlessly. The others were speechless. Feng Mingyu looked at Lin Xiao, who suddenly called him stupid, and then secretly poked Lei Yao, who was next to her. He said in a low voice, why do I feel that her tone is a bit like our leader? If the leader was here, he would definitely say the same thing. Lei Yao glanced at him and then at Lin Xiao. His eyes flashed slightly, but he didn't say anything. Lin Xiao looked at everyone and said, you guys are talking about this topic quite happily. Don't you want to know Yang Jianhua's current situation? As soon as she said this, everyone immediately looked at her. Lin Feng also came to his senses. By the way, you stole Li Zheng and the others. What was Yang Jianhua's reaction? Lin Xiao said lightly. He froze 7 or 8 guards into ice sculptures and then smashed them into pieces. Mrs. Lin's eyes widened in surprise and said, what? He killed them just like that? They were his people. How could he be so cruel? Cheng Wangshua said, Mom. He was just too good at pretending before. He is not a good person. Lin Xiao said. He planned to do something to you tonight. It seems that he wanted to use them to provoke you. But now that I've rescued him, his plan has been ruined," she said as she looked at Li Zheng and the others. Mrs. Lin said with a cold face, "He is so despicable." Cheng Wangshu sighed and said, "Well, Mom, now you know what kind of person he is. Someone will deal with this kind of scum." Lin Xiao said, "He thinks that you are all food kept in captivity by Lily. And he thinks that Yuan Tianxing and the others have already been eaten." Everyone was surprised, but Li Zheng and the others were confused. Who is Lily? Will she eat people? Is she also a zombie? Seeing the confused expressions of Li Zheng and the others, Lin Hao, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Yes, it is exactly what you think. Lily is a zombie and she is the king of zombies. She will eat people." The others were speechless. Chapter 259. Lin Feng looked at her and asked, "Then what happened?" Lin Xiao said, "I fought with him but I couldn't beat him. So I came back. Let me see." Then she closed her eyes and sensed the situation outside. She found that Yang Jianhua had arrived at the hotel, and seemed to have found that Lin Feng and the others had disappeared. Zheng was so angry that he froze the whole building from the first floor to the 6th floor. Lin Xiao opened her eyes and said, "It's very cold outside." Everyone looked at her blankly and didn't know what she meant. It was a bit cold at night. After the apocalypse, the night wind was bone-chilling, so it was normal to be cold. They were used to it. Lin Xiao sensed what the Lin family was thinking and shrugged. Yang Jianhua has frozen part of the building. But he seems to have found the solar energy and is going to dismantle it. Hearing the solar energy, Lin Feng and the others suddenly slapped their thighs and said, "Oh no! The solar energy is going to be taken by that scum." Mrs. Lin looked at Lin Xiao and said, "We can't let him take the solar energy away. Miss Lu, can't you think of a way to get the solar energy in first?" Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "The solar energy is still on the roof and hasn't been dismantled. I can't take those things that are connected to the ground, unless we dismantle them in the building." At this time, Lin Hao suddenly said, "Why don't you wait for them to dismantle it? Why don't you just steal it again?" Hearing this, the others were all stunned. Then they all looked at Lin Xiao in surprise. Lin Xiao gave Lin Hao a thumbs up and said, "Smart. I didn't think of that." Cheng Wangshu had been looking around for a while and finally couldn't help asking, "By the way, why didn't I see you bring Junjun and Tongtong in? Where did you put them?" Lin Xiao looked at her and then turned around and pointed to the small space behind her. Lin Xiaolu, who had been sitting there bored, immediately shook Cheng Wangshu's thigh and asked, "Mom, can I go and play with Tongtong?" She was bored. While listening to these people, she seemed to be sleeping. But her mom wouldn't let her sleep. Cheng Wangshua looked at her and then looked up at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao nodded. "Mom, go ahead." It didn't matter. If he was tired, he could let the child sleep over there. There's a bed over there. After her space increased, the small space moved by itself and ran to the side. At that time, the bed inside was not moved, but was exposed in its original position. After that, Junjun moved the bed in, so Lin Xiao sent her in. All of them sent her directly into the small space. Cheng Wangshua nodded, stood up, and brought Lin Xiaolu to the mini space. Lin Xiao looked at the crowd and said, "I'll go out and check out the situation first." Then the figure flashed and disappeared. Li Zheng asked Lin Feng, "Is she really a zombie? What rank is it?" His intelligence had already reached such a high level and he could even speak. Could she be the zombie king? Lin Feng shook his head. "Actually, we don't know her level, but she does have a zombie king with her." Feng Mingyu and the rest opened their eyes wide and looked around. "Is there really a zombie king here? Where is it?" "This is a zombie king. An existence that many people can't see." Feng Mingyu, Li Zheng and the others were curious to see what this zombie king looked like. Lin Feng smiled and shook his head. "No need to look, she's not here. She went out these 2 days. Otherwise, would Yang Jianhua dare to approach us so arrogantly? He would have to think twice before approaching." Hearing that the zombie king wasn't here, Li Zheng and the others were a little disappointed. Feng Mingyu asked, "What does a level 6 zombie look like? Does she have 3 heads and 6 arms or something? Is she powerful?" Mrs. Lin smiled and said, "Well, she doesn't have 3 heads and 6 arms, but she's powerful." At the very least, it was true that Yang Jianhua was no match for her. but it's hard to say if she can defeat a level 7 paranormal. Lin Wenwen appeared out of nowhere with a large plate of mutant strawberries in her hand. She was about to wash them by the lake. She happened to pass by them and said, "She's a very beautiful girl, but she doesn't like to get along with people." As she spoke, she walked towards the lake. At this time, Lin Xiao had climbed to the roof of the hotel and stood silently by the side, watching Yang Jianhua and the others dismantle the solar equipment. I didn't expect that they would find solar energy. What a big surprise. Although he said it was a surprise, Yang Jianhua's expression was not very happy. He was still gloomy. On the other side, Wu Chengyue returned to the base with his daughter and the injured Mengyu. But when they arrived at the base, the little girl suddenly had a fever. Wu Chengyue was so scared that he carried her and Mengyu to see a doctor. Seeing that it was the little princess of the base, the doctors in the hospital department nervously did a variety of examinations on the child. But after the examination, there was a problem. The problem was that they couldn't find the cause of the little princess's fever with their equipment and medical examination. At this time, although Wu Yueling had a fever, she was still sober. She looked blankly at the doctor who was busy in front of her, and then when the doctor reached out to touch her, she immediately avoided him. She kept looking at Wu Chengyue with her big watery eyes, hoping that her father would come and take her away. She didn't want to stay here. "Father, come quickly." Seeing that Wu Yueling was about to cry, Wu Chengyue walked to her side and held her hand. He squatted down beside her and said, "Be good. Let the doctor take a look at your body. Otherwise you will be sick and feel terrible." Wu Yueling shook her head vigorously. No, Lingling is not sick. Why did she have to see a doctor?" Wu Chengyue touched her forehead and found that it was still a little hot. He asked worriedly, "Lingling, do you feel any discomfort?" Wu Yueling still shook her head. Wu Chengyue could only look at the doctor next to him and ask, "Doctor, how is it? Why is Lingling's body so hot?" The doctor also looked at Wu Yueling with a blank face, and then he replied hesitantly, "Miss Lingling's physical data shows that there is nothing wrong with her. As for the reason, I have thought of a reason, but I'm not too sure." Wu Chengyue asked anxiously, "What reason? Why are you not sure?" The doctor looked at Wu Yueling and then looked at Wu Chengyue. He said, "Miss Lingling's current behavior is very much like she is about to awaken her special ability. But she is still so young. She should not be able to awaken her special ability." Wu Chengyue and the others all looked at the doctor in surprise. Xiao Yunlong couldn't help but say, "Wait a minute. How can Lingling awaken her special ability? There should be no energy source in her body, right?" Chapter 260. Speaking of the energy source, Wu Chengyue's expression froze for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter. There was indeed a strange energy in his daughter's body, and he felt it on the way back. The energy in Lingling's body seemed to have begun to awaken, giving him a feeling that it was getting stronger and stronger. Could it be that it was this energy that caused Lingling to awaken in advance? No, Yunlong. Don't you feel that the inexplicable energy in Lingling's body is getting stronger and stronger? Xiao Yunlong came over, took Lingling's hand, closed his eyes and carefully felt it. "Hey, it's true." At this time the doctor frowned and said, "Although Miss Lingling's performance seems like she is about to awaken her ability, Miss Lingling is only 5 years old. It is not a good thing for her to awaken her ability at this time." Being reminded by the doctor, Wu Chengyue's face immediately sank. His heart suddenly felt like it was poured with a basin of cold water. That's right, when the ability awakens, humans currently cannot find any way to alleviate it. They can only rely on their own willpower to endure it. So the younger the person, the lower the willpower. Therefore, when many young people awaken their ability, the failure rate is also relatively high. Only some people with a very determined mind can successfully awaken their ability. Wu Chengyue looked at the doctor with a very anxious expression and said, "Doctor, is there any way to suppress Lingling's awakening? If Lingling awakens now, she will not be able to endure it." The doctor frowned and shook his head. He said helplessly, "We currently have no effective way to suppress the awakening of the ability, and the main source of awakening the ability is a small amount of zombie virus that slowly evolves into energy that can be absorbed by the human body. When this energy accumulates to a certain level, it will explode, and then we will see the awakening of the ability. I just want to ask, leader, when you brought Miss Lingling out this time, did you encounter any special circumstances? Wu Changyue and Xiao Yunlong glanced at each other. Lingling was taken away by a zombie king, and was later rescued by others. What happened, we are not very clear. The doctor pushed up his glasses and looked at the data displayed on the instrument next to him. He thoughtfully lowered his eyebrows and said, "Last month Miss Lingling's physical examination data was very normal. It is reasonable to say that there should not be any abnormal changes within this year. Therefore, Miss Lingling's awakening must have been caused by something you encountered on this trip." Xiao Yunlong said eagerly, "Oh, what should we do now? You have to think of a way to stop the child's condition. Lingling was about to enter a coma. What would they do then? Lingling is so young, she won't be able to make it." The doctor looked up at Xiao Yunlong, then at Wu Changyue, and then sighed, "Alas, there is nothing we can do to stop this situation. I'm so sorry." "Doctor." Xiao Yunlong anxiously glared at the doctor and wanted to ask for help. At this time Wu Changyue stopped him. Wu Changyue stared at the doctor and said, "Doctor, is there really no way? We'll do anything you want us to do." The doctor was also a little anxious and said, "No, I really can't do anything. Currently, the research on suppressing the zombie virus hasn't yielded any results, so we're also helpless in the awakening process of the zombie virus." Wu Changyue stared at the doctor, and his expression became darker and darker. He actually understood that the current medical research on the zombie virus really did not have any effective development. So no matter if it was the process of turning into a zombie after being bitten by a zombie, there was no way to solve the awakening of the ability. But he couldn't just give up his daughter. "Doctor, think about it. Is there really no way? As long as we can suppress the awakening process of Lingling, isn't her life not in danger?" Xiao Yunlong anxiously paced around and said to the doctor. The doctor could only helplessly shake his head. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, we really can't do anything." Wu Changyue opened his mouth and wanted to say something. At this time Wu Yueling jumped out of bed and pulled Wu Changyue's trousers. Wu Changyue looked down at Wu Yueling, then squatted down and held her in his arms. "Lingling, don't be afraid. Dad won't let anything happen to you." After coming out of the doctor's office, Wu Changyue held Lingling and Xiao Yunlong and walked downstairs to the hospital. When he reached the hall, he saw several people coming in from outside the door. "Hey, that's Leader Wu. He's back." Yan Fengyu, who accompanied Yuan Tianqing and the others to the hospital, was surprised to see Wu Changyue and the others coming out. She greeted them with a faint smile. "Ah, isn't this Leader Wu and our little princess? When did you come back? Why are you here? Is there something wrong with your body?" Looking at the beautiful woman's kind smile, Wu Changyue was in a low mood, but there was still a faint smile on his face. "Hello, Deputy Leader Yan." Yan Fengyu looked at him, then turned around and pointed to Yuan Tianqing and the others behind her. "Oh, just in time. Let me introduce, this is Mr. Yuan Tianqing, the deputy leader who came from Netherworld King's base." Then she pointed to Wu Changyue and said to Yuan Tianqing, who walked to her side, "This is the Purple Thunder leader you were looking for before." Yuan Tianqing stretched out his hand to Wu Changyue. "Hello, I finally see the real person." Wu Changyue let Xiao Yunlong hold Wu Yueling, then shook hands with Yuan Tianqing. "Hello." Yuan Tianqing looked at him, then looked at Xiao Yunlong and Wu Yueling next to him. Suddenly he said, "This is the little princess, she is very cute. But your expressions don't look very good, what's wrong?" Yan Fengyu also nodded at this time and said with concern, "Yes, from the moment we met, you two looked very down. Did you lose a lot this time?" Yuan Tianqing looked at Wu Yueling and said, "It seems that the little princess's body is not very good. Her face seems to be very red. Does she have a cold or a fever?" Wu Changyue looked at his daughter and quickly reached out to touch his daughter's face, only to find that it was already very hot. Her face was a little red from the fever, and her originally bright expression was a little blurred. He let out a long sigh, then said, "Lingling, she is going to awaken. We can't suppress her situation now, I don't know what to do." Yan Fengyu's beautiful eyes widened in surprise, and her mouth opened slightly. "What? It can't be, this child is so young, how can it be?" Wu Qingyue's eyes dimmed. Yuan Tianqing suddenly said at this time, "How can such a young child awaken? Did you guys meet something outside? After thinking about it, he suddenly pulled Xiao Yunlong to a corner where there was no one. You guys come over here. After standing in a place where there was no one, he turned his head to Du Yuanxing, who had been invisible behind him, and said, Yuanxing, give the water in the bottle to the child to drink, see if it is useful. Chapter 261. Hearing Yuan Tianqing's words, everyone looked at him in astonishment. At the same time, they were curious about what kind of water he was talking about. Du Yuanxing immediately stepped forward and took out a stainless steel thermos bottle from his bag. He unscrewed the lid and filled it with water before passing it to Yuan Tianqing. Yuan Tianqing took the water and said to Wu Changyue, "This water of mine has a special effect. Let the child drink it and see if it can suppress it. Awakening an ability is not a trivial matter, but I can't guarantee that this water will not have an effect on the awakening." Wu Changyue took the water and looked at Yuan Tianqing in surprise. Then he looked at Yan Fengyu and asked Yuan Tianqing, "Deputy Leader Yuan, can your water really suppress the awakening of supernatural abilities?" This was someone else's good intention, so he couldn't just reject them in person. However, today was the first time he met the other party, even though he believed that the other party had no reason to harm his daughter. However, he still had to be careful. However, he still knew Yuan Tianqing's name, even though he had never seen him in person. However, he had heard that he was not a bad person. Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, "I can't guarantee that, and to be honest, I don't know much about the effects of this water. However, it was true that drinking it was beneficial to the human body. It all depends on whether you believe me or not." Wu Changyue stared into his eyes. After thinking for a while, he put the water in his mouth and took a sip. He felt a cool sensation on the tip of his tongue. Without any hesitation, he brought the water to Wu Yueling's mouth. "Lingling, Lingling? Here, drink some water first. Come on, open your mouth." It didn't matter if he could believe it or not, as long as there was a bit of hope. He had to give it a try. He knew that the other party wouldn't harm them, because doing so would not do them any good. Wu Yueling's expression was a little confused. She looked back at her father blankly. After hearing his words, she obediently opened her mouth and waited for Wu Changyue to let her drink the water. Xiao Yunlong kept touching the child's forehead and little hand. "The temperature is getting higher and higher, what should we do?" Wu Changyue passed the lid back to Yuan Tianqing after the child finished drinking. Then he touched the child's forehead. The more he touched it, the more his heart sank. Yuan Tianqing took the lid and poured another cup for Du Yuanxing. Then he handed it to Wu Changyue and said, "Come. Let her have another drink. She needs to drink 3 cups for it to be effective. But the child is still young, so he can drink 3 cups with this lid." Wu Changyue looked at him, then took the water and gave it to the child to drink without saying anything. At this moment, a voice sounded from the side, "Hey Deputy Leader. Why are you standing here? Leader Wu and Deputy Leader Xiao of Xiao Yunlong, Leader Wu and Xiao is back. Xiao Tianqing Xiao Xiao and Leader is Xiao." Everyone turned their heads and saw Lin Yu standing there with a bag of medicine in his hand, looking at them in surprise. "Time Xingyang Xiao Yu. Xiao 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 about time about. As soon as I came in, I saw Leader Wu and the others. It just so happened that I had something to discuss with them." Lin Yu walked to Du Yuanxing's side and stared blankly at Wu Changyue as he handed the lid back to Du Yuanxing. Then he watched as Du Yuanxing filled the 3rd cup and handed it back. "You of yen was about time from. Yen time yen time." Yuan Tianqing smiled faintly at her and said, "Sort of." Wu Changyue handed the 3rd glass of water to the child dubiously before returning the bottle cap to Du Yuanxing. "Thank you. If Lingling's condition improves, is there anything I can do to help? You can look for me anytime." Lin Yu didn't know what was going on and just stared blankly. Yuan Tianqing smiled and said, "Of course, if it's you, Chief Wu. It would definitely help us a lot. However, I have a favor to ask Leader Wu and the 2 vice leaders for help. I hope that no one else knows about the effects of this water." Yan Fengyu smiled and said, "Of course, don't worry." Wu Changyue also nodded, but his attention was focused on his daughter. Yuan Tianqing looked at him and said, "You should take the child back to rest first. We should also leave. Maybe the effect of the water isn't that fast, so you don't have to worry too much." Wu Chongyue smiled at him and nodded. I'm sorry I didn't receive you well today. I'll be free in 2 days. I'll treat you to another meal. Yuan Tianqing shook his head carelessly and said, Alas, don't be so polite with me. I also want to help this child. The two sides said goodbye, and then Yuan Tianqing and Yan Fengyu took Lin Yu and Du Yuanqing back to their residences. After Yan Fengyu left, Lin Yu asked Du Yuanqing, What kind of water did our deputy leader give the little princess to drink? Du Yuanqing looked at the medicine he had exchanged and suddenly said to Yuan Tianqing, Boss, in fact, we don't need these medicines. It's really a waste to exchange food for them. With Lu Tianyu's spatial water, they really didn't need these ordinary medicines. Yuan Tianqing said, This is just for show so that people know that we have enough food. Maybe this will attract some people to follow us. Du Yuanqing blinked and said blankly, Oh, but he still couldn't figure it out. Why did they have to let others know that they had food? What if someone had bad intentions and wanted to rob them? However, with the boss around, as long as it wasn't a level 6 or 7 expert, even if they came, it would be useless. Yuan Tianqing said to Lin Yu, You've also drunk the water I gave the little princess today. Didn't you feel that your body is recovering too fast? This is our secret weapon. Be careful not to tell anyone. Lin Yu said, Then why did you let Wu Chongyue and the 2 deputy leaders know? Yuan Tianqing said with a smile, First, I also want to know if this water can be effective in awakening. Second, if we help him this time, it'll be equivalent to doing him a big favor. If we cooperate in the future, the grudge between us will disappear. As for Miss Yen, she's not a bad person, so it doesn't matter if she knows. Du Yuanqing suddenly smiled and said to him, Boss, have you taken a fancy to the goddess of the entire base? Be careful not to be destroyed. Yuan Tianqing glanced at him indifferently. What nonsense are you talking about? I have someone in my heart, but she's so warm to me. I can't always be cold to her. Besides, she's helped us a lot. Be gentle to women, you know. Serves you right for evolving into a dog. Du Yuanqing looked at him speechlessly. You make it sound like you're not a dog, Yuan Tianqing. Lin Yu looked at the two of them and said, Our deputy leader is so handsome and nice. It's normal for a goddess to like him. And the deputy leader's luck with women has always been very strong. Du Yuanqing touched his chin. Well, that's right. Why didn't I remember that the deputy leader used to be liked by a lot of women, but I don't understand who you like. If you like someone, then say it out loud. Chapter 262. It's okay, said Yuan Tianqing. Except for our own people. They don't know that the water belongs to Lu Tianyu. If they know that Lu Tianyu has become a zombie who can save people, they'll be very happy. It'll be fun. While speaking, he gave a meaningful smile. Du Yuanqing popped his eyes and looked at him. That's not very nice of you. You'll bring her trouble, won't you? Yuan Tianqing glanced at him and said carelessly, Don't be silly. Don't you know what kind of zombie she is? I don't think even a level 7 superpowered man can catch her. Do you think she's as silly as you? She's smart. Besides, haven't you seen what kind of skills she has? I've been hearing you guys talk about Lu Tianyu zombies space. Are you talking about the same person I'm thinking about? She's not the famous Lu Tianyu in this base, is she? Du Yuanqing and Yuan Tianqing looked at him and nodded together. No way. Lin Yu said with disbelief. Has she really become a zombie? I heard that she was knocked out and thrown into a zombie crowd. Didn't she get torn into pieces? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, No, she's fine. Du Yuanqing joined the conversation. Except for the fact that she has become a zombie, you won't think of Lu Tianyu, who everyone despises. Now, she has become a good zombie who likes to do good deeds. Lin Yu didn't know what to say. It was getting more and more ridiculous. Turning into a zombie was one thing. What was doing good deeds? Her body was torn apart when she died, so no one would be able to recognize her now. Besides, did that water have anything to do with Lu Tianyu? Based on their conversation, it seemed that only Lu Tianyu had that water. But, can the water really help with the awakening? What if it doesn't help the little princess? Will Wu Chongyue have a problem with us? What can he possibly say about that? Said Yuan Tianqing. I'm helping him out of kindness. It doesn't matter if the water can help him or not. But I'm sure that it won't hurt his little princess. Besides, I've already said this in advance. I can't guarantee that it'll be effective. Du Yuanqing said. Besides, Wu Chengyue doesn't look like a narrow-minded, unreasonable person in the base. I'm sure he won't blame us. Yuan Tianqing nodded at him. On the other side, Wu Chengyue carried Ling Ling back to the house and put her in the bedroom. So he asked Xiao Yunlong to find another doctor, who was a weirdo in the base. He didn't really listen to the words of others. He would treat when he wanted to and when he didn't want to. It was useless to force him. However, he did respect Wu Chengyue a lot. As long as it was Wu Chengyue's people, he wouldn't hesitate to kill them. He would agree no matter what. This doctor was called Liang Dashu. He was not originally a doctor. He was just an ordinary bookstore owner. He liked to read a lot of books and read all kinds of books. But he especially likes novels, comics, and web novels. Of course, he also read books on industry jargon. However, they only looked at it half-heartedly. Only when they encountered a problem that interested them would they delve deeper into it. He wasn't a medical major, and the only reason he was called a doctor was because of his awakened superpower. He was a healer. For external injuries and some minor ailments, it could be easily healed with the use of his superpower. He could only cure the serious diseases and incurable diseases because his superpower wasn't at a high level. Therefore, even if he could cure those diseases, he could only suppress them and delay them for a while. However, his current job wasn't a bookstore owner or a doctor. Instead, he was a researcher in the Zombie Virus Research Institute. He had read a lot of books. After the apocalypse, he had put forward some hypotheses about the formation of the zombie virus based on the books he read. Some of his findings were confirmed, and under Wu Chengyue's recommendation, he was sent to the Zombie Virus Research Institute as a researcher. However, as he had awakened his superpower, he had successfully learned some medical knowledge. In a small research room which was filled with all kinds of complicated instruments, a bearded man with long hair that reached his neck was studying all kinds of data. At that moment, someone knocked on the door twice, but the man didn't respond to the knock. However, the person outside the door didn't seem to wait for his response. She knocked on the door, then pushed the door open and walked in. After that, a young woman with a cold face walked in and said, "Uncle Liang, Chief Wu sent someone to invite you to his place." Liang Dashu didn't take his eyes off the data, but still responded, "Is Chief back? Something must be wrong with her body. She wants me to go to her place." "Alright, I get it. Go and get the first aid kit ready. I'll be done in a few minutes." The woman nodded expressionlessly, then turned and left. In Wu Chengyue's small building, Xiao Yunlong touched the little one's forehead. She looked very sleepy, but surprisingly, she hadn't passed out yet. After touching the little one's forehead, he touched his own as well. With hesitation, he said to Wu Chengyue, "Has Ling Ling's fever stopped? I don't think it's rising anymore. Her temperature was about the same as it was 3 minutes ago." Wu Chengyue was looking at the thermometer as he said with a sullen face, "Yeah, 58 degrees just now. Now 57. 8 degrees. I think it's gone down a little." The fever had gone down a little, but that was still a scary number. Xiao Yunlong popped his eyes and said, "What? 58 degrees? So high." He hurriedly turned to Ling Ling and asked her, "Ling Ling, do you still recognize your godfather? Can you please blink your eyes if you do?" However, Ling Ling only looked at him confusedly, without making any reaction. Wu Chengyue put the thermometer aside, then walked to the bed and sat down. He bent over and said to Ling Ling, "Ling Ling, can you see your godfather?" Ling Ling looked at Xiao Yunlong, then slowly moved her eyes to Wu Chengyue's face with confusion. After that she nodded slightly. Wu Chengyue asked, "Do you have strength? Do you feel any discomfort?" asked Wu Chengyue. Ling Ling shook her head slightly, then continued shaking her head. She seemed to be very weak. After that, Wu Chengyue said to Xiao Yunlong, "Ling Ling's mind is clear, but I think she has no strength." "It's been an hour since we came back," said Xiao Yunlong. "Ling Ling's fever hasn't gone down yet. However, she didn't fall into a coma. Is that a good thing? Besides, her body temperature is too high. Something bad is going to happen." Wu Chengyue said, "I've rubbed her wounds with alcohol for a few times. Now I don't think her temperature will go up. Now let's wait for Dr. Liang to come and check on her." "Dr. Liang has read a lot of books," said Xiao Yunlong, "and now he's passionate about virus research. I wonder if he has any way to help Ling Ling. A trace of hope flashed across Wu Qingyue's eyes as he said, I don't know. I hope he can figure out a way. Chapter 263. Not long after, the guard announced that Dr. Liang had arrived. Wu Qingyue hurriedly walked out of the bedroom and saw two people carrying medical boxes walking in from the door downstairs. Dr. Liang, Wu Qingyue greeted as he walked down the stairs. Leader, may I ask if you need me to treat someone? Liang Dashu's appearance at this time was a little tidier than when he was in the research room, but he only casually tied his hair up at the back of his neck. The big beard on his face gave people a sense of sloppiness no matter how you looked at it, even if he was clean. Dr. Liang, Miss Emily, please take a look at Ling Ling's bedroom. Wu Qingyue looked at them and said, What's wrong with the little princess? Liang Dashu and his assistant Emily asked him in surprise when they heard that he wanted to take a look at Ling Ling's bedroom. Ling Ling is awakening her ability, Wu Qingyue said with a gloomy expression. What? Quick, bring me up to take a look. Hearing that it was awakening her ability, both of them were shocked. Liang Dashu hurriedly ran up the stairs. Once in the room, Liang Dashu first checked Ling Ling's temperature, then looked at her pupils and tongue. Then, he gently pressed his hand on Ling Ling's forehead. If it was the usual Ling Ling who saw strangers, she would have already shrunk to the side, let alone let others touch her. But today she just looked at this and that with a blank expression. Her gaze would only stay on Wu Qingyue for a long time, but she did not react to Liang Dashu's actions at all. After Liang Dashu pressed his hand on Ling Ling's forehead, he was scalded by the temperature of her forehead. But he did not let go and continued to press. Then a strange energy came out of his palm and slowly spread to Ling Ling's forehead. At this time the other three people stood quietly at the side, staring straight at him. After a whole 15 minutes, Liang Dashu's expression became more and more serious. Seeing his expression, the others already understood what he meant. Wu Qingyue's legs suddenly went soft and he took a step back. He turned around and slowly walked to the sofa to sit down. Then, he supported his drooping forehead with one hand, so that no one could see his expression. He did not know why, in the past 2 months, his Ling Ling always encountered these kinds of bad things. Previously, he was abducted by that woman Lu Tianyu, and he had no idea where he was thrown to. It wasn't easy to find him. A few days ago, he was captured by the Zombie King and almost lost his life. Now that he was back, he suddenly had to awaken his special ability. If it was the Lord who had awakened his special ability, he would not be so worried. However, Ling Ling was only a 5-year-old child. After another 10 minutes, Liang Dashu unwillingly let go of his hand. He shook his head helplessly at Xiao Yunlong and Emily. I can't help it. My ability doesn't have any effect on the energy in her body. Liang Dashu said dejectedly, but soon he looked at Wu Qingyue and said, But it's strange. The child's body temperature was already very high. The child should have been unconscious by now. Why was she still awake? Not really awake. He should be half awake. As he said this, he bent down and looked at Ling Ling's eyes carefully. Wu Qingyue raised his head abruptly. His eyes were bloodshot. He asked Dr. Liang, What do you mean? Liang Dashu straightened his back and crossed his hands in front of his chest. After thinking for a moment, he said, I feel that Ling Ling's current situation seems to be stuck by something. She seems to have been pressed the pause button, and the energy in her body has become temporarily trapped. She can't shrink back and she can't release it. In short, the progress of her awakening has been forcibly suppressed. As soon as he said this, the other three people widened their eyes in disbelief. Dr. Liang, is what you said true? Liang Dashu nodded and said, Yes. Although I'm not sure how long this situation will last, it is currently in this situation. Logically speaking, normal people will not have this situation. Have you encountered anything strange related to the child? Or what did Ling Ling encounter? Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at each other and suddenly said, Ling Ling drank some water. As soon as he finished speaking, Liang Dashu immediately looked at him. He asked, What water? Where did she drink it? Where did the water come from? Also, how can you give the child anything to drink? What if it has the opposite effect? Wu Qingyue said, The other party said it was good for the child, and from his point of view, there is no reason to harm Lingling. And I drank a little at the time and felt that there was nothing wrong with it, so I gave it to Lingling. Xiao Yunlong suddenly reached out his hand. Wait a minute, is Lingling's situation good or bad now? Dr. Liang, I don't quite understand what you are saying. Just tell me, is Lingling in danger now? Liang Dashu said, didn't I say? Lingling's current situation is that the awakening energy is temporarily suppressed for some unknown reason. Lingling's current situation is temporarily not dangerous, but I don't know how long this situation will last. She has not passed the critical period and needs to continue to be observed. Do you understand? Xiao Yunlong nodded. Is that so? Did that mean that Yuan Tianqing's water was effective? Then if we find him to continue to give this kind of water to Lingling, will the situation improve? With that, he suddenly turned and walked out. I'm going to find them now. Wu Chengyue just glanced at Xiao Yunlong and did not stop him. He turned to look at Lingling. If it was really that Yuan Tianqing who helped a lot, then he could only continue to trouble him. A thought flashed through Liang Dashu's mind and he suddenly said, wait, I'm going too. With that, he immediately turned and chased after Xiao Yunlong. Emily was left with a wooden expression in the room, looking at Wu Chengyue and Lingling. Then she walked to the bedside and bent down to touch Lingling's forehead, then frowned slightly. Her fever has reached this degree, but she is only in a semi-conscious state. It's amazing. Wu Chengyue had taken off Wu Yueling's clothes because her temperature was too high. He only took a thin sheet to cover her, but her hands and feet were exposed. Emily reached out and pressed Lingling's forehead like Liang Dashu just now, sensing for a few seconds. Then she let go. Lingling's spirit is very stable. There are no abnormal changes, so there will not be a mental breakdown for the time being. Amazing, what kind of water is that? She looked at Wu Chengyue. Although there was no expression on his face, there was some curiosity in his eyes. Wu Chengyue stood up and walked to the bedside, gently stroking Lingling's long hair with his hand. He shook his head. In fact, I don't know, I just gave it to Lingling with the mentality of trying.